Now, today, we are gonna see, what if Harry Potter manifested Veil of Soul with Black Widow? Join Patreon for early ACESS of Super Op stories, also adult and steamy Harry Potter stories too. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. Harry Potter was ready to move on from his life. He had been alive for well over 700 years, out of which he had been hidden for about 600 years. Harry had found out he was immortal when at the age of 20. He was shot in the chest, during a mugging, and died. But he woke up again, a few hours later, back in Grimmauld Place. Kreacher had felt the bond waver a little, and had decided to find Harry and bring him back home. Harry didn't think much on it, thinking it a wizard thing. Don't blame him, he was raised in a cupboard. But then he found out he could not cut himself, even if he tried. Except for the sharpest knives. Later experimentation revealed that he couldn't even get hurt by bullets fired by any pistol, so he thought he'd somehow become bulletproof. Then he got shot by an assault rifle during a terrorist attack, and died. He woke up, again, about 2 hours later in Grimmauld Place. So he deduced that once he dies of a cause, he will never die of a cause similar or weaker than that one. This takes what doesn't kill me makes me stronger to a whole new level, Harry thought, sardonically. He later found out that when he died and came back this time, the invisibility cloak had disappeared from its place in the moleskin pouch, which no one else can even open. So he assumed that the wand must have disappeared too, along with the stone. He did check on the wand and found out it had disappeared too, the protective wards on Dumbledore's grave undisturbed. So he just assumed that Hallows were gone forever. But, one day, when he was really cold, and he needed an extra blanket, he accidentally conjured it, wandlessly. After experimenting a little, he found out that he could perform every spell he knew, wandlessly now. Getting a stone in his stomach, he decided to try and become invisible, by willing himself to be. And he became. Trying to call someone's ghost from the past yielded the same result. He could do it by just thinking about it. So he deduced that the Hallows did not disappear, they merged with him. He thought to himself, well, at least they can't be stolen now, can they? Don't know if the immortality is a boon or a curse, yet. Knowing that he can't just tell the world that he can't stay dead, and was quite possibly an immortal because of the Deathly Hallows, he snuck into Hogwarts and into the Room of Requirements. There he specifically asked for everything the room had about immortality. So it was, that Harry found that any book that has been in Hogwarts at one time or the other, could be found in the Room of Requirements, including a book about Horcruxes. Of all things, which he threw away as soon as he read the title, and a book explaining alchemy. Harry copied each and every book about alchemy that the ROR provided him with. And they were in hundreds. And it was only alchemy. He visited his closest friends, the Ministry 5 along with Andy and Teddy, telling them what had happened and what he had planned. Hermione and Luna agreed instantly, asking for the books when he was done with them. Andy did agree, but made him promise that he won't neglect Teddy. Harry of course agreed, even offering to blood adopt Teddy, so that he'd have at least one parent. Andy happily gave her blessing for the adoption. Ron was a little sad. Not for the reason you think. He was a chess player. He thought 20 moves ahead. He already knew that Harry would have to watch them all die off, watch their families die off. So Ron was sad for Harry. Harry said, I'm touched, Ron. I didn't even think that far ahead, mate. But don't worry, I'll keep an eye on everyone, yeah. But it's not for at least 100 more years, 'cause you'll stay with me, won't ya mate? You'll all stay with me, right? For at least 100 years. The group shared a hug at that and cried for a while. Which no one mentioned it again, ever. That uncomfortable conversation done, Harry started studying with alchemy, because that was the subject he wanted to learn the most. Pretending to be an alchemist, who had developed a philosopher's stone was the only thing he could think of to explain his immortality. Plus making gold out of lead was a happy coincidence. Harry started learning from the basics of alchemy, to the mastery level stuff, occasionally calling up the ghosts of the author of the book he was reading to help him understand the stuff. The authors were more than happy to help a new student reach their potential, being teachers themselves. So after learning everything he could about alchemy for 10 years, during which he stayed hidden from everyone, excluding Andy, Teddy, and the Ministry 5, Harry came out to the public, looking like he was still 20, making the announcement that he had made a Philosopher's Stone, which he had, and had become immortal because of it. They all bought the lie, as it also explained his youthful appearance. After that, he received offers from the Department of Mysteries to come work for them, which was obviously a ploy to study the Philosopher's Stone and the effects it had on a human body, so Harry refused, repeatedly, to make them stop asking, using different kinds of threats in their offers. Harry started teaching at Hogwarts. He taught alchemy to students who had passed their potions, transfiguration in ancient runes or arithmancy owls with at least an EE, for 12 years, including his adopted son Teddy Lupin. Teddy went on to become one of the best alchemists in the world, finding all the different uses of phoenix ashes, alongside his father, Harry. After the decrease in the number of students due to World War III, which started in 2021, Harry stopped teaching alchemy. He instead taught his next best subject, Dada. The yearly intake of students had gone down from the average of 40 to 24. He taught the subject for 30 more years, becoming the headmaster at the age of 72, replacing Phileas Flitwick. Flitwick had become the headmaster after Minerva's death when Harry was 47. Surprisingly, Luna decided to teach charms, while Draco Malfoy took on the post of the potions teacher. Neville was already the head of Gryffindor and the herbology professor. Harry stayed as the headmaster for well over 50 more years, leaving only in the year 2102, when he lost all the Weasley adults as well as Teddy in a bomb blast by some neo-Nazi group. Losing everyone almost broke Harry. Ginny, Dean, Ron, Hermione, Teddy, George, Bill, Charlie, Percy, all their kids, all dead. Only Fleur, of that generation of Weasleys, remained alive. Only the great-grandchildren of the Weasleys, and grandchildren of Teddy and Victoire, were alive, which was the only reason Harry didn't completely lose it. Harry found the group and murdered every last one of them, even the ones who financially supported them, which finally calmed him down, but didn't heal the hurt in his heart. Harry, along with Fleur and Gabrielle, who stayed single and free, raised all the Weasley kids in the burrow itself. He only left once the youngest, Lily, the granddaughter of Teddy and Victoire, became 20 and moved out. Harry once more retreated, this time to a black family island, never to be seen again. He kept an eye on the goings-on, as well as Teddy's and his friends' descendants, by having house elves bring him news. So what else to do with so much time on his hands? He traveled and he learned. Everything from mundane subjects like history, mathematics, programming, to the professional crafts like carpentry, smithing, and ironically, pottery. All by calling up famous ghosts from the past. He traveled to different places too, conversing with the local ghosts and learning from them. One magical ghost from Iceland taught him everything he knew about Nordic runes. And he knew about them a lot, being the foremost expert in runes of his time, or so he said. Still, Harry learned. He had a lot of time in his hands. After that was done with, Harry called up a few goblins he knew, like Griff, Ook, and asked them for the best weaponsmiths they knew. Knowing their names, Harry called them to teach him forging weapons like they did. They tried to refuse to teach him, they really did. But, since he was the master of death, him asking was equivalent to an order, and they had to teach him. But, to learn goblin forging, Harry had to first find some goblin silver. That was the easiest part. 2 words: Philosopher's Stone. He already had the Sword of Gryffindor, so he just had to transmutate normal steel to goblin silver. Without the Philosopher's Stone, it would be next to impossible, but with it, easy. So Harry learned to forge enchanted weapons which were not much of the standards of Gringotts, goblins, but way better than what humans have ever made. He had nothing to do but learn and forge. So he made a lot of weapons. Some swords, axes, hammers, even spears, and kept them in his moleskin pouch, which was by now his personal bag of holding. He even turned his island into a sanctuary for all kinds of animals. He brought a few pairs of every animal on Earth, both magical as well as mundane, and kept them on the island, though he did refrain from bringing in the blast-ended Scroots from Hogwarts. He even brought in a few families of house elves to the island to take care of it. Once he was gone, and he knew that he will someday go, either he'll die, or he'll move on. It was because he knew that someday or the other, the rest of the humans will most definitely destroy the rest of the planet. He did have to magically expand the island, to accommodate all these animals living together. But for him it was child's play. The island was already protected against detection because of the Fidelius charm, but it was not protected against area-wide attacks like the nuclear bombs. To protect the island against any kind of outside influence, even radiation, Harry made up a ward that he had derived from an ancient Egyptian ward, that only lets purified sunlight into the ward. Not even air could cross the ward. He already had plenty trees on the island for oxygen, so he didn't have to worry about that. Turned out, he was right to worry. In the start of the 24th century, humans managed to nuke every city on the planet, in an effort to kill off all the wizards, making it so the whole planet was unlivable for animals and plants alike. Except Harry's island. Harry stayed on the island for 300 more years. After humanity became extinct, terraforming the Earth, little by little, gathering magical artifacts which were not destroyed by the nuclear fallout. When every living being outside Harry's island was dead, Harry started cleaning up the planet. He sped up the terraforming of the planet Earth and cleaned up the atmosphere. Once that was done, Harry decided that it was time to leave. It was time to move on. First, he went into his healing pit to destroy it. It was literally a pit of water that had the Philosopher's Stone inside it and a few spells cast that helped the water heal any and all injuries within minutes. The effects were so strong that the more a human used it, the stronger he became. Harry was already about 4 times stronger than an average human. He did not want anyone accidentally discovering the pit and using it, so he destroyed the stone and banished the remaining water. He then went into the stasis room, which had housed the 735 babies he had found, all abandoned from all over the world, that he had kept in stasis for well over 400 years, which was when he first suspected humanity will destroy itself. He wanted these babies to be humanity's new beginning. A few of them were even the last of the descendants of Teddy and the Weasleys. Though it hurt him to find abandoned children, he brought them in. Blinky, Harry called out. A pop signified the appearance of a house elf. Yes, Harry, sir, Blinky asked, looking at him with the big tennis ball-sized eyes that still reminded him of Dobby. Harry had trained the new elves to not call anyone master ever again. Thankfully, I'm going to be leaving this world soon. Harry began. Blinky blinked her eyes once, bewildered and upset. She said, but why? Harry smiled at her kindly and said, it's my time, Blinky. I've stayed way past my time. I think it's time for me to retire. Completely this time. Blinky cried a little and said, thank you, sir. She sniffled and said, what will we do then? Harry looked outside the window, towards the beach, and said, I want you guys to take care of the planet once I'm gone, and when it is livable enough, please release the Tassus charm on some of the babies and raise them outside this island. Take any books you might need from the library, whenever you need them. Bring a few of the animals and plants outside too. This land now belongs to the house elves of Earth. Harry paused, letting it sink in. Continuing, he said, if you think it necessary, raise 2 babies on this island itself. 1 male and 1 female. So they can take care of this island. And keep an eye on the world with you. They can have a family here, on this island, and make it their home. Blinky asked, with tears still in her eyes, who be giving us orders then, Harry, sir? If you be gone. Harry smiled at her and said, did you know when humans first turned the elves into house elves, they made up a clause in the curse they used? I didn't. An ice guy by the name of Merlin Emrys told this to me. The clause was that, once every adult human in the world agrees that house elves are to be freed from the curse, they will be. Harry nods at her hopeful look and continues, Blinky. From this day forth, the house elves will forever be known as elves, the guardians of Earth, and will be free from any kind of slavery. Saying this, both Harry and Blinky, along with all the elves on the island, glowed a soft gold. Mother Magic had once more established a direct connection with the elves, which was disturbed when the first wizards enslaved the elves. Blinky immediately jumped on Harry, hugging him very tightly, and cried loudly, feeling the change in her magic immediately. Harry patted her back and continued, "Blinky, I have only one favor to ask of you and the rest of the elves, along with any of your descendants." Blinky separated herself from Harry and nodded, saying, "Ask away, Harry sir. The elves be most glad to fulfill it." Harry became serious again and said, "Protect the planet, teach the new humans right from wrong, and don't let the humans destroy Earth again." Blinky nodded rapidly, still crying. Harry patted on her back, and left to say his goodbyes to the other elves. He had already packed the few necessities he might need, including his full library, the firebolt which was just for sentimentality, as he could fly on his own, and his full wardrobe. It was as an option if he ended up living but in a different place. So, after saying goodbye to each and every living thing on the island, including the plants, as he had cared for them for so long, Harry went down to the basement, where housed the most hated artifact Harry had collected. The Veil of Death, the thing that killed his godfather, Sirius Orion Black. Taking a deep breath, and without any ceremony, Harry simply walked through the veil. Exactly 777 years after he was born, Harry Potter escaped this life and moved on to the next great adventure. MCU. Unknown date. 8th century AD. For a while, everything was dark, so dark that he couldn't even see his hands. He tried the Lumos spell a few times, to bring some light, but it fizzled out before he could see where he was. His magic just dispersing in the space around him. It was like the void didn't have magic of its own, so it hungrily ate the spells Harry cast. Harry didn't know how long he stayed in the dark place, but it was a long time. But then suddenly, there was light, a small crack in the air that was filled with white light. Harry tried walking towards the light, but he could not feel his body. He then tried to will himself to move there, and move there he did. He went closer and closer to the light, floating, slowly but surely. When he finally reached the light and touched it, there was a bright flash in his vision and he was thrown into the ground. "Ah!" Harry groaned. Just because he didn't get hurt didn't mean he didn't even feel pain. He got up, dusted himself off and took a look around, taking in the sights of where he was. There were trees everywhere around him. The place did not look familiar to him, but the trees made it at least look like he was on Earth. Though the age, he couldn't tell. It could be 10,000 years before humans began roaming the Earth, or it could even be 10,000 years after humans destroyed it. Who knows? He already knew that time travel was a possibility. Harry took out his holly wand, which he still used for such delicate tasks, and using the point me spell, levitated himself into the air, and started flying towards east, searching for civilization. He decided to do the task invisibly, as he did not want to shock any humans with his attire, because he was in the wrong time period, or that he was flying. He also didn't want the residents of this planet to attack him because he was a human, if they weren't humans and this wasn't Earth. He flew for many hours, finally giving up on flying and started apparating into the direction he wanted to go. A few miles at a time. After a few hours of doing that, Harry finally found a group of humans, thankfully still on Earth. But their clothes were weird. It looked like why were cosplaying about 8th 10th century or something. Harry finally got close and listened to them. He could not understand a word they were saying. Finally getting fed up of listening to what sounded to him like garbage, Harry looked into one person's eyes and copied all his knowledge about the language. Listening to their talk, and deducing that he was way back in time, Harry said just one thing. "Bugger." And he just flew off, to find some remote island he could hide from the humans on and never be found. He did find an island in what he believed was the Atlantic Ocean, and made it his home. It was reasonably far from the nearest land. As far as he could tell, he was in the past of his own dimension and the island was in the northwest Atlantic Ocean. First, he screamed his throat out, swearing as much as possible, till he couldn't shout anymore. Then he explored the island. The island, which would henceforth be called Avalon, was a pretty big island, the size of modern-day Northern Ireland, with an area of about 15,000 square kilometers. There were no humans on this island, so it was filled with animal and plant life. The nature here sang a beautiful song, according to him. After building a temporary shelter, out of an expanded tent, Harry started clearing a spot near the beach. He started building a modest beach house, where he could someday bring someone when he finally decides to come out of hiding. It had 2 modest bedrooms, for now, a kitchen, bathroom, and a living room. He had brought a lot of technology from the future, but that would only be brought out if he got bored. Sirius's bike was stored in the garage, and the goblin silver weapons that he'd made were kept in the vault in his basement. The vault was the most secure room on the planet. Even if, somehow, someone enters his house, they'll die before they can make it into the vault. He stayed on Avalon for many years, making changes to it as he needed. He made another healing pit in his basement, next to the vault, along with a training ground outside the house, so he could continue growing stronger. He liked being physically strong, plus the stronger his hands, the better the weapons he makes. He also started bringing in wild as well as domestic animals from all over the world to his island, so that he can prevent them from going extinct. For food, Harry had started farming the few things that could be grown. Some in artificial greenhouses, and buying the rest from all over the world. He went to India for spices and most of the grains, like rice. The kings there were very thankful for the gold bars he gave them. He visited many places for different kinds of vegetables and fruits, and some of them he started growing on his island. Magic was a very useful thing for that, as he could maintain any temperature necessary for the growth. For clothes, he had brought his full wardrobe with him, so he didn't need to worry, but he did buy clothes from a lot of places to better blend in. He started visiting the villages, once in a while, never staying in the same place twice and always using protection spells. He really did not want any of his children around in this era. That might have made things really awkward. While in one of the African villages, where Harry had come to trade grains, he heard of an animal that looked like a giant cat, with thorns on its neck, rampaging around the lands. A noondu. Harry was so excited that he sold his grains for half the normal price in cattle, sent the cattle to Avalon with a portkey, and started roaming Africa in search of noondus. He wanted to capture it. Because the other humans will just indiscriminately kill it. He knew that from experience, as he was alive during the last extinction of noondus in his time. He followed its trail all over Africa, finally leading him to East Africa, where lived a whole family of them. Quickly using overpowered, stunning spells, Harry stunned the entire family of noondus and sent the family to a remote corner of his island and started looking for more noondus. One family probably won't save an entire species. He invisibly flew around looking for any signs of more noondus, when he found one, and something more. A tribe of African people had cornered a young noondu and were about to kill it with some spears. Normally, stone or steel could not pierce the thick skin of a noondu. Which was why he was shocked that there were already a few spears embedded in the noondu's skin. That pissed him off, just a little. Here he was, trying to save a species, and the humans were trying to kill the same. So Harry knocked them all out and took all their weapons from their out-cold bodies. A metal that can pierce noondu skin. He wanted the obviously magical metal. He carefully stunned the small ndu and teleported it to a clearing near his house. Not finding any other noondus that day, Harry returned home with about 20 spears and 30 daggers made up of the strange metal. The first thing he did was pour the healing pit water over the small noondu, while whispering healing spells. It took a few minutes, during which the noondu woke up, but it was completely healed later. It was still young, about a few months old at most. So it was small. Harry took it to his home and named it Felix. He was smart, not terribly imaginative. The next day, Harry studied the metal he took from the tribe and found out that it was really energy absorbent, even resisting thrown objects easily. So he went back to East Africa and searched for more of the metal. For the first few days, he didn't find anything, except for another group of noondus that he sent to his island. Then on the 17th day of searching, he found a whole mountain full of the metal. Though there were a few hundred people working on digging it, it looked like the metal was there for millions of years, but they hadn't worked out how to use it well before. Only using it to make spears, daggers and a few swords. So Harry invisibly went in there and appropriated a few tons worth of the metal, directly teleporting it to his island. He wanted to study this magical metal and find out what else it could do. Harry spent the next few years just working on the metal, purifying it of all its impurities and melting it down into bricks. Later he started studying the metal's properties. The first and one of the most important things he learned about the metal is that it was completely vibration absorbent. Nothing blunt could ever harm this metal. A sharp enough knife might be able to pierce it, if it is also strong enough, as proved by He Swad of Gryffindor scratching it deeply. But a normal steel knife couldn't do it. So it stayed completely safe. The second thing he learned was that all this vibrations and kinetic energy it absorbed was stored within the metal. Inside the bonds between atoms. There was a limited storage capacity though. So he just has to figure out how to release that energy to make a weapon that can first take a hit and then give that hit back. One downside was that this metal was also radioactive, thanks to all the kinetic energy it had already stored. His theory was that it was from impacting the Earth those few million years ago. Thankfully nothing would ever happen to him, but he still decided not to store the metal anywhere near his house. He didn't want his future kids to be retarded. He stored He metal in a cave he had found in one of the mountains on his island, as it was not being used. Harry then started on purifying the metal and using it in making a sword for himself. He made only one, because he didn't exactly need more, but the one he made was made using the methods the goblins taught him. So the sword was extremely magical, and enchanted to always return to him when called. Nothing could stop the sword from coming to him. Checking the durability of the sword, Harry found that it was now extremely durable and almost indestructible. It was almost equal to the sword of Gryffindor. But it was only because the goblin silver was a superior metal to the other. He spent the next few years on the island, caring for the animals he'd brought, including the Noondoos, who had started to see him as friend as he did not harm them. He still kept Felix with him, as a pet and a friend, and introduced the families of Noondoos to him. Harry occasionally went back to Africa to keep an eye on the tribes who were mining the metal. On one such visit, he got to witness an all-out war between the 5 African tribes for the possession of the metal. He watched it happen for over 5 years, when finally something interesting happened. There was a man, holding a spear, who just went into a trance during the fight. Looking closely, Harry could see that he was seeing something out of this world. Not knowing what it could be, Harry stayed out of the situation. The weird thing was, no one else even tried to attack him during the fight. Like they couldn't even see him. Finally the man got out of his trance and started running towards a direction, completely ignoring the fighting. Harry followed him, because this was interesting. He followed him to a cave, where the man ducked inside, and Harry followed him inside too. The man, who Harry found had a little magic, a different kind, but magic nonetheless, approached some purple glowing herbal flowers. Just looking at it Harry could tell that it was radiated because of the metal. The man ate one of the flowers, and again went into a trance and dropped down to the ground. The man's chest and throat area began glowing purple and his muscles began to look more defined. Curious, Harry took one of the flowers discreetly, to analyze it and then continued watching the show. The man suddenly got up and started running outside, much faster than the speed he had before. Harry could tell that he was at least 10 times stronger than before. And twice as strong as Harry himself. Harry flew after him, and saw the man defeat, but not kill, just by his fists and legs. Each and every single one of the other tribe leaders. Once the fighting paused, the man told them that he received a vision from the goddess Bast, who named him the King of Wakanda, which was the place's name. And told him to protect it and the Isifo in it, which was the name of the metal. She gave him the way to power and the means to protect Wakanda from the outer world. 4 of the tribes instantly agreed to follow him, but one tribe which believed in the Hindu god Hanuman, refused to follow a king their god did not choose for them. And they returned to their homes in the outskirts of Wakanda. Still staying inside, but not following the king's rule. They hashed out a truce and then went out their separate ways. Excitement over with, Harry returned home. He thought, so, that metal's name is Isifo. And Isifo radiated the plant, animal life as well as the humans. I'll have to keep an eye then if this Isifo gave the Wakandans magic. Harry then studied the purple glowing flower he brought with him, finding out that it enhances the human body by first sending it into a trance and then increasing the muscle density, bone density as well as everything that makes a human. Finding out that it was safe to consume, Harry entered his healing pit, just in case, and ate the herbal flower. He immediately felt his eyes close, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Harry opened his eyes and looked around. There were trees all around him. But they were filled with magic, like it was all just conjured. The skies were a little purple, but it looked like the African skies. Harry Potter, Master of Death, a rumbling voice said from behind Harry. Harry turned around to see a giant black panther. It was at least as big as the Cerberus he encountered in first year, probably bigger. "Who are you, and where am I?" Harry asked, not showing that he was afraid. The panther sat down on its giant back paws and said, "My name is Bast. The people of Misr call me the goddess of protection. You, Harry Potter, are within the astral plane in which I reside." Harry sat down on the ground, thinking, if this really is the goddess Bast, and this is her astral plane, then I'm probably in some deep shit and fucked. He finally spoke. "Why am I here? Is it because I ate the herbal flower?" Bast rumbled again, from her throat and said, "Yes. I blessed the heart-shaped herb for Wakanda's people. You are not Wakandan. Unfortunately, you are also not a mere human, so I cannot even punish you. Which is why I came to talk to you. To give you a warning. Bugger me sideways." Harry mumbled to himself and rubbed his head in frustration. "What is the warning, Lady Bast?" Harry asked her. Bast lowered her head so she was directly in front of Harry and growled out. "Wakanda and her people are under my protection. Do not try to harm them. Hard times are coming for Earth, and it will need the people of Wakanda to get through those times. This is the only warning I will give you. You are free to keep the things you've stolen from Wakanda, but do not do that again. Master of Death or not, I will destroy you." Harry nodded his head at that, understanding the sentiment, and said, "Very well. I will not harm any Wakandan, unless they try to harm me first. Do you know when that threat will come to Earth?" Bast Simple rumbled out, "Yes. But you are not supposed to know it. Goodbye, Master of Death." And Harry woke up again in his healing pit. Bloody all-knowing gods that don't even tell anything important. Harry grumbled to himself. He got out of the pit and went to his training room to test out his strength. Harry found that he was more than thrice as strong as before, physically. And he was even faster than the Noondus in running. His reflexes had improv, and he now had a cat-like grace in his body, which he didn't mind. Harry immediately started training to get used to this new power. He could already fight hand-to-hand, but now that fighting prowess was increased, by a lot. He could now take on Felix, one-on-one, and win. Not the bigger Noondus though. Deciding to think about it later, Harry went to bed. The trance had used up a lot of his magic. Harry spent the next few days doing the same thing. Waking up early at about 5, working out for a few hours, checking up on his greenhouses and his farms. He then went and mingled with all the animals he had on Avalon. The Noondus were now all living together, thankfully, not fighting with each other. They fed on some deer or other such animals every day. He was properly a farmer now. Boy, if the British purebloods can see me now. Harry thought to himself. Felix was the size of a big dog now, and had started eating deer meat. He was also a lot more playful than most cats Harry had seen, almost like a dog. But don't let him hear you say that. Then he would work on making a beacon of magic that would attract any magical species on this planet to Avalon. He didn't want the magical animals to go extinct like they did in his time. For the past 20 years, Harry had been charging a ward stone with his magic, daily. It was finally full enough for his use as a beacon, and so Harry set it up at the highest peak on Avalon. The beacon worked in a way that it sent a signal to any and all magic-sensitive animals that there was a safe place for them if they wanted it. They could choose to ignore the message and continue living wherever they are. It would just cause the beacon to give them the location once and then stop bothering them. Once they accept or reject the signal, the beacon stops working for them. Thankfully, it only sent the message to the magical animals of this dimension. Humans won't be able to hear them, and neither will any of the demons. Demonic animals like hellhounds might hear them, but they won't be able to get the location or follow the signal. It just wasn't their frequency. After making sure that the beacon was working, giving the location of Avalon itself, Harry decided to leave Avalon for a while. Avalon was completely self-sufficient. meaning he did not have to always go and feed the animals, they could do it themselves. There was a ward covering the entire island which prevents a species on Avalon from being extinct. If too much lives of a single species are lost in a short amount of time, Harry is immediately notified. So Harry locked up his house, training grounds and the healing pit, warding them completely, and then he put the Fidelius charm on Avalon, making himself the secret keeper. Can't ever be too much paranoid. Plus the beacon will make sure that the animals get the location to get through the Fidelius charm. Felix had to stay on Avalon, but Harry knew that it would be all right. He then left Avalon to travel, this time walking. He first flew to the mainland, which was Africa, ignoring American continent even if it was closer, and kept walking towards east. He passed through Wakanda, which was now being built in a place fit to be called a kingdom. And kept on walking. He stopped in a few places to hunt and eat, or if he found something interesting. Like the cursed lake he'd heard about that turned any animals that touch the water to stone. Turned out that the lake had a high amount of salt and the chemical reactions caused the animals to petrify. From Africa, Harry then traveled through Egypt, and to the European continent. In Egypt, Harry found the first magical object since he had been thrown in the past. An ankh which granted godly powers, or so the legends say. But that's a story for another day. In Europe, Harry searched for any signs of magic, and came across something he was really surprised by. There was historical evidence of Europe being ruled by Arthur Pendragon along with his faithful advisor, Merlin, about 400 years ago. Which was surprising because they also said the Merlin was still alive. So Harry did what he does best and called up a few ghosts. The ghosts told him his story, most of which he already knew. Except the part where Merlin fought his master, or trained Morgana. One of the ghosts that Harry called up had a really interesting conversation with Harry. "Who are you? How did you call me on the mortal plane?" the man asked as soon as it was his turn to be summoned. See, the way it worked was that unless you specify who you want to summon, the stone will summon any and all ghosts. TS of people that have ever lived in that area. One by one. Thankfully, starting from the present to the past. My name is Harry Potter, and I'm the Master of Death. I called you here to ask a few questions, if you don't mind. Harry asked. This was the first ghost who mentioned the mortal plane. The man bowed to Harry, as his station demanded, and said, "Ask away, Master." Harry nodded to him and asked, "For starters, what's your name?" Quote, the man looked up and said, "My name is Julian. I'm a humble sorcerer and protector of this dimension." Harry tilted his head to a side and wondered, "Sorcerer? That's the first time I'm hearing that word. Is that like a wand-waving wizard? Or is something different?" The sorcerer, Julian, snorted at that and said, "Please. Sorcerers do not need pesky wands. We use magic through our hands. Our bodies. We are far better than the puny wand-waving wizards of legends." Now Harry knew that wizards are too stuck in their beliefs, and hence can't reach their limits properly. But still, this man, at one moment groveling at his feet and then bad-mouthing wizards. Oh, that can't work. Careful, Julian, you're talking to a puny wand-waving wizard who has faced death and come out on top. Can your sorcerers say the same? Harry taunted. Pretending to be evil was entertaining. Julian sputtered a bit before composing himself. He said, "Apologies, Master. But yes, our Sorcerer Supreme has mastered death. He's immortal." He immediately shut his mouth, like he wasn't supposed to say this. Harry scowled at him and said, "Tell me about the Sorcerer Supreme, Julian." An immortal, here, he'll at least have to meet the immortal Sorcerer Supreme and determine his threat level. Julian choked a bit, like he was trying to stop himself from answering the question. But the order from the master triumphed over his oaths as a sorcerer and he said, "His name is Merlin." Yes, that Merlin. He's been the Sorcerer Supreme of this universe for close to 500 years now. Harry hummed to himself, thinking. Wait a minute, he asked. Sorcerer Supreme of this universe. Like there's more than one. And what does the Sorcerer Supreme, or sorcerers in general do? Julian, now excited a little, said. The sorcerers protect the universe against attacks from outside. Other dimensional beings, demons, devils, even talking dragons. I've seen them all. Our land is pure, as compared to other dimensions, lands. Or so Master Merlin says. So those demons are really intent on conquering us. The Sorcerer Supreme is the title given to the strongest of us, and their job is to protect the sanctums against the most dangerous threats. Other dimensional threats. This was new. Did this cult of sorcerers kill themselves off before his time? Or were they just hidden? Harry asked him, "Where can I find the sorcerers?" Julian bowed and said, "The sorcerers can be found at Kamar Taj. It's near the Himalayan mountain range. You'll know it when you find it." Harry dismissed Julian and thought over the conversation. He told him he was a sorcerer and Merlin was the Sorcerer Supreme of this universe. Those words exactly. Of this universe. Not planet. Not even the universe. This universe. And those other dimensional threats. Demons. This was all new to Harry. So Harry decided to drop everything else and go find this Kamar Taj. Harry traveled through the continent, taking in the scenes and went to Nepal. There, Harry started looking for the most magical place in the vicinity. Harry found what he was looking for, but not the way he had hoped. When Harry used his spell Ostend Magicae, which, like a radar, searches for magical objects, but what he found was not a magical object, but a total blank space. With zero amount of magic. Even a desert has magic. Which meant it was purposefully hidden. So Harry followed the signal and came across a monastery. Finding a big door, behind which he could feel the magic being performed. Now that he was close, but different to what he was used to. Harry knocked on the door and waited. A young man opened the door and said, "Come in. The Sorcerer Supreme has been waiting for you." Harry frowned. That was really creepy. Someone was already waiting. And Sorcerer Supreme knew he was coming. Harry walked in behind the Indian-looking man, and followed him to a small hall. There were a few small reading tables, which were occupied. Harry kept looking around and saw that there were a few magical objects kept on shelves, probably not the real collection, and a few scrolls and books. Harry felt a powerful presence approach him, so turned to look. He saw an old man enter, holding a golden staff in his hand for support. The staff had a crystal orb on its top, most probably used for scrying. Harry recognized the face as Merlin immediately, having spoken with his ghost in his time. "Merlin." Harry simply greeted. "Harry Potter, I didn't think I would see you in this universe," Merlin simply said, frowning. Now Harry stopped and asked, "This universe? You mean I'm in a different universe than before?" Merlin nodded and said, "Oh, yes. Follow me, I'll explain everything." Merlin led Harry to an office room. He sat on one side of the table on the tatami mat, with a lot of books behind him, and offered Harry a seat. Harry sat down on the tatami mat and finally asked what had been bugging him since the beginning. "How do you know who I am? I never even introduced myself." Merlin smiled and said, "I am the Sorcerer Supreme of this universe, Mr. Potter. It is my job to study any and all entries in this universe from out of it. I have observed you for the past 2 decades, what all you did. Just to figure out what your motive was. But I could not always see you. You disappeared from even my scrying orb, and I am the most versatile scryer in the universe." Harry nodded. It made sense. The cloak would not let anyone detect him, not even Merlin. He countered, "But, I never introduced myself to anyone. Even with scrying you'll have difficulty identifying my name." Merlin smiled at him and said, "Ah. Caught that, did you? You see, I, in one of the other universes, did something amazing as well as stupid. It connected me to every Merlin in the multiverse. Whatever they know, I know. I can't always use that knowledge, but I know it. Amazing. Connected to every version of yourself. That's just amazing. So, what now?" he asked. Merlin thought for a while and said, "Depends on you. You are a powerful wizard, Mr. Potter. The few examples I have seen of you using magic is simply astonishing. I would like to teach you sorcery, if you accept." Harry widened his eyes, surprised. He had come here just to meet Merlin. Because the only times he had talked with Merlin was when he was dead. Harry asked, "Why? Also, is there a difference between my magic and this sorcery everyone speaks of?" Merlin nodded immediately and said, "The magic you and I use comes from inside us. We either use that magic, or the one that surrounds us, the ambient magic. Depending on the need, yes." Harry nodded, because he had observed the same thing. So Merlin continued, the magic sorcerers use is not magic per se. They are dimensional energies. Each and every dimension produces some energy. Like the dark dimension produces an energy which is darker than anything. Then the hell dimensions give out demonic energy. There are other millions of dimensions, some good, some bad, some neutral, and even some which do not produce dimensional energy. The sorcerers learn to harness this energy, a mixture of the dimensional energies, and control it to make up spells. Wait, so the sorcerers are not born, but anyone can learn it? Harry asked, interrupting Merlin. Oh yes, every sorcerer here was a regular non-magical person first, even me. Then we all came to this place, to heal, for advice or many other reasons. Some of them healed themselves and returned home. Others stayed here to learn some more and became sorcerers. Merlin explained. Even you. But I thought you said you used magic from inside you. Harry asked. Merlin became a little sad and said, alas, the story is too long to tell and connects to my other story. So would you like to learn? Harry thought about it. He didn't have anything else to do, other than taking care of Avalon. Plus this Merlin managed to see inside his warded island. It wasn't hidden by Fidelius, but still. The ward was cast by him. I accept. I would like to learn this sorcery. Never know when I might need it. Harry said. Merlin smiled at Harry, and welcomed him to the order by their traditional introduction. He sent him on a trip through the dimensions. Harry stayed with the sorcerers for 10 years. Becoming a master after 3 years. When he went from sanctum to sanctum, in search of a relic. Harry did not find anything that matched with him. But since Merlin had said that every sorcerer has a match, he did something no one had ever tried. Harry sent out a pulse of magic all over the world and more. The pulse traveled down to the center of the earth, and it also went as far as Mars in space. The magic found a match on the moon. Harry went there, using the sling ring, covered in spells to help him breath. Using the astral projection, he found a crypt in the center of the moon. Of a human witch. Why the witch wanted to be buried on the moon? He didn't know. He trave LLED to the crypt and found an axe which was extremely magical, but had chips on the blade. He brought the axe back to Merlin, who told him that the axe was called the Lost Axe of Angarumus and was extremely magical. Harry decided to remake the axe after leaving Kamar Taj. After 10 years of staying with the sorcerers, Harry said his goodbyes and went back home, to Avalon and Felix. He had missed Felix. Avalon was flourishing. The animals had increased in numbers, thankfully. There were also a few surprises. Like a group of phoenixes who had decided to start living near the waterfalls. Or the 3 dragons who lived in the mountains. That could talk. Talking dragons. Seriously. There were 2 female and 1 male dragon, who told Harry that there was only one other dragon alive, who lived with human Kai users. Helping them with selecting Iron Fist after Iron Fist. Harry already knew about Iron Fist, Kunlun and the Hand from his studies at Kamar Taj, so he did not think much about it. Kunlun can handle their own problems. There were also other magical animals like direwolves of Tibet, which Harry had to physically transfer to Avalon. Or the hippogriff herd and thestrals. There were only 5 thestrals remaining on Earth, the rest having been killed by humans. He was just happy to save 5 species from extinction. There were a few aquatic species, including mermaids that moved to the lake at the center of the island. But they kept to themselves. Harry then decided to melt down his axe and remake it as his 3rd personal weapon. The first 2 being the sword of Gryffindor, and the Icipho sword. He'll have to name that sword and rename the Gryffindor sword. First he used a spell the goblins, ghosts had reluctantly taught him, that made it easy to make alloys. It told the user exactly how to make a perfect alloy from 2 or more metals. The ratio, the temperature, the heating time. It even told you the exact steps to do those things. It was a sort of time manipulating spell, which hecked out all the possibilities and told you the perfect one written on a parchment. So Harry mixed the axe with the correct amount of melted Icipho and made a new axe. It looked exactly the same as the previous axe, except shinier and sharper. He named the axe Angar, as a tribute to the original wielder of the axe, Angarumus. Angar was so sharp that it could cut the Icipho in 2, without much stress. It was thanks to the spells as well as the magical metals it was made from. Harry always carried it with him, keeping it in his moleskin pouch. Angar was enchanted, so that if Harry thinks about it, it'll always appear in his hands. No matter where it is. As for the other two weapons, Harry remade the Sword of Gryffindor, mixing it with Icipho and turned the hand and a half-decorative sword to a proper long sword using a fang of a dead Noondu as the hilt. He named this one Godric and engraved the sword with it, while his first Icipho sword was remade, this time infusing it with the dimensional energies. He named this one Bast, as a tribute to Wakanda. It was 2 years after Harry had left Kamar Taj that Merlin called him back. He said that he had something important to ask of Harry. Harry made a portal directly inside Kamar Taj, and knocked on Merlin's door. "Enter," Merlin said from the inside. Harry entered the room and silently sat on the offered chair. Merlin was somber. Either something bad had happened, or it was about to happen. "I have been alive for 500 years, you know. I learned to become a sorcerer at the age of 70. Taught by the Sorcerer Supreme of the time. He was really strong, but he was not a good person. As you know, not all Sorcerer Supremes are good." Merlin began. Harry listened silently, letting Merlin talk. "When I was 200, I became the Sorcerer Supreme of this universe. The Sorcerer Supreme, after my master, but before me, was from some other planet. He stayed with us, teaching, for close to 70 years before his death. I was not always immortal, you know. I performed a dark ritual that borrowed power from the dark dimension, from Dormammu, to make you immortal." Merlin paused at that. Harry thought about it. Not everything dark was evil, he knew that. But still, the ritual literally made you immortal, corrupting your magic in the process. "Why are you telling me this, Master Merlin?" Harry asked. Finally, Merlin smiled grimly and said, "The reason I'm telling you this is because I have lived enough. I am going to die soon. I'd rather have a competent successor before I die. And who better than the one I taught myself?" Harry was surprised. He did not think this could have happened. He still had Avalon, his visits to different people, studying. Could he afford to lose it? Well, it was not exactly going anywhere, and he had a lot of time on his hands. "I will do it, for a while. But why me? I'm strong, I know that, but you've known me for only what? 10 years. There are sorcerers here that have been here for decades. Why not them?" Harry asked. Merlin smiled at that. He said, "I have asked Masters Siddharth, Alexandra and Khan to become masters of the 3 sanctums. You are still the strongest amongst the rest. So I asked you. Now that you have accepted, come. There are things that only the Sorcerer Supreme is allowed to know, for now." Merlin then showed Harry an artifact called the Eye of Agamotto. It was made by T. He first Sorcerer Supreme of this planet, to make use of the Time Stone. When Harry asked what the Time Stone was, he then told Harry about the Infinity Stones, and how many there were. He also told H.I.M. what would happen if anyone collects all 6 of them. Merlin then told him that no matter what happens, the Eye of Agamotto must always be protected by the Masters. Harry nodded and decided to study the stone later. After explaining every Harry had to do, Merlin said, "Now that's done, I'd like to say good luck in your future endeavors. Farewell, Sorcerer Supreme." Merlin then went outside, to tell the other sorcerers about the change in leadership, and to say goodbyes, and left Harry in the room, alone, to think. Would he be able to do it? Who knows? But he'll still do it. Unknown date, 965 AD. It was over 200 years after Harry had accepted the position of Sorcerer Supreme. He had battled many monsters over the years. Some demons always managed to breach the barriers, once every few decades. Annoyed, Harry developed an alarm system that would notify the nearest sanctum of the breach and they could then take care of it before anything too bad happens. He knew that completely blocking off the Earth dimension from the other dimensions was not possible if sorcerers had to continue using the dimensional energies. Maybe the sorcerers in his home dimension did this, which in 2RN killed off the sorcerers but prevented any of the outside threats to enter the dimension. Harry had fought a few extra-dimensional dragons, who could talk and were a little magic resistant. For the first time in their lifetimes, the dragons found someone who could hurt them when fighting physically. He still went to Avalon at least twice a year on the total lunar eclipses to take a dip in the healing pit. So now he was even stronger than before. If he had to guess, he would say he was about 20 times stronger than an average human. Other than that, Harry even kept infiltrating different civilizations to just mingle. But mostly, he kept to Avalon and Kamar Taj. He still always held back during spars, because he did not want to hurt anyone accidentally. He had noticed that the rate of ease in his strength was slowly decreasing. So it was possible that he'd reach a point when he stops growing physically stronger. He had calculated his peak strength to be reached in 800 years. Some might ask him, why was he still taking baths in the healing pit if he was already so strong? The answer was not that simple. Harry had a feeling that he is going to need this strength someday. Bast's warning still fresh in his mind. He didn't know when it was going to happen. He just knew that he was going to need to be as strong as possible. By the help of Icipho, Harry developed a lot of new magical devices. There was a locket that could erect kinetic barriers around the wearer so nothing physical harms him. Then there was a bracelet that could be used like a glamour charm. It was a useful invention that helped him in his infiltration. He also managed to weave the Icipho into threads that can be used, in conjunction with wool, to make clothes. Clothes that can deflect steel knives, hammers, and most probably bullets. He had a gun, and he tried. He did learn more about the stone eventually. From the Book of Cagliostro. He managed to learn all the spells that required the eye and did most of them at least once. One spell could reverse time, other could make time loops, which he really liked. There was one spell he simply refused to use, but learned it as a precaution. A spell that can show you every possible timeline from that moment to his death. He did not want to go crazy by watching how he dies, or if he was truly immortal, he did not want to watch billions of years of his life. Until the universe finally becomes one singularity again. Also, it would have been unfair for him to know everything that was going to happen. So he kept it away. He did find something interesting though. The stone inside the eye, the time stone, was continuously emitting some energy. Being a curious person that he is, Harry siphoned that energy and stored it in a few Icipho pellets. The pellets immediately turned green. Getting an idea, Harry tried to use the pellet to try and reverse time, which it did, but it could only reverse time in a certain region and could not stop reversing it. Until the pellet was completely depleted. Felix was a baby once again. 100-year-old baby. To get over that problem, Harry replicated the Eye of Agamotto, with goblin silver. It was the most magical metal in his possession. It was even more conductive than the unnamed metal that the sling ring was made of. Harry filled 10 such pellets and kept them in his mokeskin pouch. What? The energy was being wasted either way. Speaking of Felix, Harry noticed that thanks to the magical bond between a wizard and his familiar, Felix had absorbed a lot of magic from Harry. So he had grown to be a foot taller than the biggest Noondu on Avalon. So he was now 9 feet tall as compared to the 6 feet average and the 8 feet tallest of the Noondus. Whether he was immortal or not, was not known, but he was already older than the oldest Noondu on Avalon and still looked to be in his prime. The other side effect was on Harry. He became immune to any poison weaker than Noondu breath thanks to being close to Felix. Although basilisk venom was in his veins, it was purified thanks to the phoenix tears, and also it did not actually kill Harry. One day, Harry got a ping on his alarm system that told him that a breach had occurred. But it was not extra-dimensional. Cautious, Harry went in alone, taking only Felix, to the point of the breach. Harry had a habit of being invisible and silenced when going anywhere for a stakeout. Which he was thankful for that time. Felix, thanks to being his familiar, was also invisible. There was an army of giant white blue beings that had red eyes. They were close to 9 feet tall, were lean, not fat like he expected giants to look like, and cold simply radiated off of them. Frost giants. Jotuns. What? Did Norse mythology exist? Nothing. They were standing in front of a village in Tonsberg, which was going to become a part of Norway in the future. Harry didn't have time to think, because the leader of the giants used some sort of shining white cube, which was obviously magical, to freeze everything in its path. It froze houses, people, animals and even plants. Acting quickly, Harry made portals below each and every person and animal frozen by the attack and sent them to Kamar Taj. His students knew what to do. The giant leader looked around and roared, Who is there? Show yourself, coward. Harry landed about 50 meters away from the leader, and brought out his axe Angar. Pointing the axe at the leader, he said, leave now, or perish. Felix, now visible, started growling beside him. Harry had taken the protection of this planet really seriously. The G.I. Ant laughed at him and sent out a beam from his magic cube. Harry, knowing that letting the beam touch him was dangerous, made a portal in front of him, letting the energy through, and sent it back to the giants, who surprisingly were frozen by the beam too. The giants stood frozen for a few seconds, pardon my pun, and suddenly as one roared in anger. Harry was about to run forwards to attack them, when a beam of rainbow lights came down from the sky and landed right behind him. People wearing golden armors started coming out of the rainbow light. Bifrost. So are these the beings called Asgardians? As soon as the giant leader saw the light, he gave off the order to attack. Harry, seeing that these Asgardians were, at least currently, on his side, started running with them to attack the giants. He couldn't use his magic without causing damage to the Asgardians too, so he used his physical strength, for the first time, not holding back. He threw his axe Angar at the giants with his full strength, which started cutting through the giants like they were butter. He punched, kicked, and smashed every giant that he encountered. He used his panther-like reflexes to evade any hands that tried to catch him, knowing by just looking that it would give him frostbite. Eventually his axe came back in his hand and he started cutting them with it. He could see out of the corner of his eyes that Felix was enjoying himself by scratching, cutting into the skin of the Jotans, sometimes even biting their heads off. He did not give the Jotans the chance to freeze him. Seeing the giant leader standing in the back with the cube in his hand, Harry decided to take care of him. He started running towards the leader, cutting any Jotan that dared to come in his way. Many of the Jotans started coming in his way to prevent him from going to the leader, so Harry simply apparated right in front of the Jotan leader. The leader attacked with the beam of ice again, which Harry dodged. He swung his axe at him, but the Jotan dodged it. This one was stronger than the rest. A lot stronger. Felix was still attacking the Jotans with gusto, the Asgardians doing the same. The leader of the Asgardians was furling beams of magic from his spear and slowly moving towards Harry and the Jotan leader. Harry kept trying to land a hit on the Jotan with his axe, but the Jotan kept on dodging it, while firing his ice beams once in a while. Finally getting annoyed of this cat and mouse game, Harry threw the axe into the air and started using his magic. He first fired a normal incendio spell to see the effect it had on him. The giant yelped and went back a few feet, but was otherwise alright. With wide eyes, Harry saw the wound heal right in front of his eyes. As long as I'm holding the casket, I will never get defeated, the Jotan boasted. Harry smirked and said, thank you for telling this to me. He fired an Accio on the casket before the Jotan could understand. He underestimated the grip the Jotan had on the casket, though. As he came along with it, Harry summoned Angar to his hand and cut the hand of the Jotan right in his wrist of his left hand, which was holding the casket. The Jotan screamed out loud in pain, and finally getting scared, stood up and teleported out of there. Seeing him go, more of the Jotans started leaving Earth and teleporting to somewhere. Damn it, Harry screamed in frustration. He wanted to end this battle right here and now. Even Felix looked frustrated, but enjoyed the fight. He looks around at the various golden armored soldiers, all looking at him wearily. One of them, apparently their leader, came forward hefting a big staff, spear, and said, who are you, wizard? Harry looked at the leader, right in his eyes, and said, you are on my planet, you dunderhead. Introduce yourself first. Harry loved using that word, like a huge spit in Snape's face every time he uses it. A few of his soldiers pointed their swords at Harry. One of them said, you are in the presence of the King of Asgard, mortal. Have care how you speak. Harry turned to the person, completely ignoring the rest, and said, and he's on my planet. His title means shit to me. Also, did I fucking ask you who he was? No. Then shut your damn mouth and answer only when I ask you something. He shook his head in exasperation and turned to the apparent King of Asgard. He did not mention his mortality, or the lack of it, as they would then immediately perceive him as a threat and start attacking, which would have been annoying. The king was watching the exchange with weariness, which showed in his body language. Harry finally said, "So, King of Asgard, I'm the Sorcerer Supreme, protector of this planet. Now you know who I am. Introduce yourself and get your army off my planet." The king became angry and started moving forward, threateningly. Felix landed beside Harry and growled at the king, while Harry simply raised his eyebrow and projected a little of his magical aura at the king, making him pause and stumble a little. He controlled himself and continued walking, which frankly impressed Harry. Stopping a few feet in front of Harry, he said, "I am Odin Borson, the king of Asgard and the protector of the realms. We fight the same fight, sorcerer. I have sworn to protect this planet against the outer realms and I was only defending it." Harry nodded at him and said, "Thank you for your help. I appreciate it. Now if you don't mind, I'd like to return to my home and rest." "You may return the way you came." Saying this, Harry turned around to pick up the casket the Jotun was so fond of. It was an amazing piece of magic as well as technology. "We will take the casket with us, sorcerer. It is too dangerous to be left on Midgard with your kind," the king said firmly, from behind Harry. Harry looked at the king once, tilting his head to the side, and said, "No, you will not. The right of conquest means that this casket now belongs to me. You don't want to be known among your army as a thief, do you?" Harry smirked at the flustered look that entered Odin's face. Odin nodded once, resigned, and said, "Very well. Be warned. The Jotuns might come to Midgard again for the casket." Harry smirked and projected his full magical power at the army. Each and every soldier dropped down to their knees, gasping for breath. Odin was sweating, trying really hard not to fall down like the rest. He was physically the stronger of the two, but magically, Harry had been getting stronger and predominantly using magic for 1,000 years. He said, "Trust me, if they come to my planet again, they won't be leaving alive. Now leave." Odin nodded at him, and stayed in the same spot until Harry receded his magic. He then signaled his army, who started leaving through the rainbow lights, Bifrost. After taking the bodies of their comrades, Odin looked at Harry once more and left. Harry looked around at all the destruction these aliens had caused. First Harry separated the Jotun corpses from the houses and burned all of them. He was not a scientist, did not have the knowledge or the equipment to study their bodies. He then cast a high-powered reparo spell to repair all the houses. Taking the casket in his hands, Harry first went to Avalon to store it in the vault and cast a variety of containment fields so the Jotuns would not be able to sense it. If they had a magical item, they had magic. Harry left Felix to roam and be his guard on Avalon and checked up on the island. He then returned to Kamar Taj to see how the unfreezing had gone. Turns out, his students were smart. They simply burned a fire in the ground and kept the iced people around it, which were starting to melt. This was a good fight. There were a few human casualties, which he really regretted. The aliens were all dead, at least those that came to Earth. Now that he had seen their fight, as well as their energy signatures, Harry could build an alarm system for if any of them ever return. He got right to it, teaching his students as well as the masters along the way. He told the masters to document the event. The first time masters of the mystic arts encountered otherworldly beings. It would be a great help for the future generations. Once making sure the alarms worked by mimicking the energy signature of the Jotuns as well as the Asgardians, Harry went back to his office. He had some writing to do, Sanskrit writing. Odin, the king of Asgard, was weary. They had just won the war against Jotunheim, although at great costs. The population of Jotunheim had gone down by 60%, with 30% of Asgard's own soldiers lost. And he had lost the casket of ancient winters on Midgard. The human, he was different than the other mortals. Somehow, the mortal had gotten about as strong as an average Aesir. Physically he was not a threat to him, Odin All-Father. But magically, the mortal was leagues above the best seater of Asgard and Vanaheim combined. Just taking a look at the fraction of his power was enough to stop most of his Aesir. And now, he had the casket of ancient winters, which Odin wanted to keep in his vault. Surely a mortal can't secure an artifact such as the casket. And it's been 50 years. Obviously the mortal is old by now by the human standards, most probably even dead. It was prime time to get the casket back. Making up his mind, Odin called out, Heimdall, bridge, Ing Balder and Amora and come to the throne room. Heimdall was the guardian of the Bifrost, keeping an eye on the goings-on in all the 9 realms and sometimes even beyond. His sight could see everything, or so the legends say. Balder was Odin's baseborn son. He did not have any right to the throne, but had enough prestige as Odin's son. He was stronger than the average Asgardians but not as strong as Odin was. While Amora, she was the strongest magic user on Asgard other than Frigga. But Frigga was a Vanir, of Vanaheim. So Amora was the strongest Asgardian seater. It took 10 minutes for all 3 of them to come to the throne room, during which Odin had not moved from his place on the throne, Frigga beside him, playing with little Thor and Loki. Thor was 63 years old now, while Loki was 50. They both looked to be about 2 years old in human years. Heimdall, Balder and Amora kneeled down in front of Odin, and chorused, All Father, and waited for orders. Odin looked to them and said, Heimdall, go to Midgard with these 2, to the place we fought the Jotuns. Find a mortal there, Harry Potter. He's something called the Sorcerer Supreme of the realm. He has the casket of ancient winters with him. I want you 3 to bring it back. If he's still alive, ask him if he'll sell it to us. If he's dead, bring the casket either way. But I want the casket to be sitting in our vault at any cost. Dismissed. Saying this, Odin turned to Frigga and started speaking softly. Heimdall, Amora and Balder turned back and started towards the Bifrost. Heimdall, Balder called out. When Heimdall turned towards him, he asked, Why does the mortal have the casket of ancient winters? Shouldn't it be with the Jotuns? Heimdall turned back towards the road and said, When the battle happened, before Asgard's army appeared on Midgard, there was a lone mortal standing in front of the army of Jotuns. The casket did not work against him as he could make portals with his hands to divert the power of the casket. When Asgard got there, there was a standoff on the field. Our presence ignited the fire that was the battle, and it began in earnest. The mortal and his animal battled against the Jotuns, but not entirely with us. He was strong, not as strong, physically as you. But he had strong magic. He cut off Laufey's hand, taking the casket as a rite of conquest. Amora frowned thoughtfully. A cedar. On Midgard. Midgardians didn't have cedar, did they? She asked. Since when do Midgardians have cedar, Heimdall? Since the beginning of time. The records are hidden from everyone other than the king, queen, and myself. Even I can't see into their places of practice. They call themselves sorcerers and only protect the planet against external threats. They don't initiate attacks. Be wary, he might be immortal. But he could kill all 3 of us before we know it. I've felt his power before, do not be arrogant with him. Heimdall explained. He had been on Asgard when the battle happened, but had seen the battle from the observatory. Even from Asgard, Heimdall could see how strong the mortal was. If he even was a mortal. Avalon, Earth. Harry was just about to go to Kamartaj, from Avalon, when his alarm tripped, telling him that 3 Asgardians were on Earth, back at the same place the battle happened. Deciding to check on it first, Harry closed his eyes and dropped back into his astral form. If there ever was a spell that he found the most useful, the astral projection was right next to the Expelliarmus. It does exactly what it seems it does. Projects your astral form. He used it for everything from surveillance to reading books while sleeping. Harry let his astral form follow the signal from the alarm towards Tønsberg, Norway. It barely took him a minute to reach from Avalon to Norway. Reaching there, he tried to sense for the Asgardians that had come here. Finding the 3, 2 male and 1 female, Harry followed after them for a while, listening. One male was black and tall, about 7 feet tall, while the other was a little more than 6 feet tall and white. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. Both of them were wearing armor that was fit for the best. The female on the other hand was beautiful. She was blonde, with green eyes, and wearing a fancy green dress. It was free in movement, and looked durable too. All 3 of them had at least a little magic in them, with the female having the most. About as much magic as Voldemort had, in fact. So all 3 are fighters, while the lady is also a magic user. But from what I can tell, her brand of magic is different. Harry said to himself, Do you know a person named Harry Potter? The short, Blonde one asked, for the 15th time. He's not short per se, just shorter than the black guy. Speaking of the big guy, he and the lady turned behind them, towards Harry, and he said, it appears we don't need to find him. He's found us. Huh, he did not expect this. The big guy was looking right in Harry's direction, his creepy golden eyes staring right in his green ones, while the lady was just frowning and looking in his general direction. So she sensed my magic. And he can see astral forms. Interesting. Granted, I wasn't especially hiding it. But still, he saw my astral form. It is especially designed to be invisible. Making a motion with his head to follow him, Harry started going outside the village, Heimdall following him. And the other two Asgardians following him. Once outside the village, Harry willed his astral form back into his body and immediately apparated to the same spot, making it look like his astral form gained a physical form, and asked, so, I've heard you're looking for me. What can I do for Asgard? The big guy, who was definitely the leader of this excursion, came forward and said, greetings, Harry Potter, the Sorcerer Supreme of Midgard. I'm Heimdall, and these are my companions Balder and Amora. We have come to make a bargain. Huh, Heimdall, makes sense. Isn't he supposed to be the All-Seer? Harry frowned at him, and said, Amora, the Enchantress. Balder, son of Odin. And Heimdall, the All-Seer. Aren't you supposed to be guarding the Bifrost? Balder and Ra looked a little shocked, but Amora smirked at him too. The mortal interested her, while Balder was just thinking, how did this mortal know this much? Is there a spy on Asgard? Heimdall looked at the mortal in wonder. Either he has a spy on Asgard, or the seers on Midgard had made their tales famous. He asked as much. Harry replied, oh, there's tales of all of you. Even of Odin's younger sons, Thor and Loki, and even of Loki's children. But you're not here for that. What would you like to bargain for? Heimdall, along with Amora and Balder, straightened up, and said, King Odin, the All-Father, Lord Protector of the Nine Realms, has requested the return of the casket of ancient winters which you won from King Lofi of Jotunheim. Well, I don't actually need it. But it seems they do. So what can I ask in return? Knowledge. Weapons. Let's start high. And what will I get in return? Harry asked. Before Heimdall could say anything, Balder loudly interrupted, have care, how you speak, mortal. The casket belongs to Asgard after we won the war against Jotunheim. You should learn your place and just return the stolen relic. Harry raised an eyebrow, while Heimdall and Amora glared at Balder, both cursing his hot blood of the House of Odin. Harry turned to Balder, and in a chilling voice said, seems the blood of Odin runs strong in this one. Right now, you are my guests. Which is the only reason you aren't screaming your throat out in pain. So sit down, and shut up. Saying this, Harry conjured a baby chair, the size of Balder, around him and trapped him there with an incarcerus and a sticking charm. He then conjured and stuck a pacifier in his mouth. And then a durability charm on everything. Amora snorted at Balder openly and started laughing, even Heimdall cracked a small smile. He then turned to Harry and bowed a little. He said, I apologize for his actions, Sorcerer Supreme. He is still young and doesn't know tact. Harry raised his eyebrows and exclaimed, he's at least 1,000 years old. That does not equal young, mate. Heimdall nodded and said, yes. But by Aesir standards, he is very young. Forgive him, please. Harry looked at the furious Balder and said, nah. Let him be like that for a few hours. The spell will dissolve an hour after you go to Asgard. Now, what will I get in return for the casket? I'm not just going to give it to you. I'm going to sell it. And the casket is important to Asgard. So I want something of equal value. How about our cedar then? Amora asked, smirking at Harry. She liked this mortal. He doesn't look as old as he should be, considering he fought in the Jotunheim Battle of Midgard, and knows conjuration and enchanting. Judging by his bracelet and the necklace, he is also an alchemist and an infiltration specialist. Harry looked at Amora and asked, what branches of magic are you the most proficient, my lady? Instead of answering verbally, Amora created 2 copies of herself, conjured a dagger in each hand and threw them at the copies. The daggers passing through them. The copies wavered like an image and disappeared, along with the daggers once they were buried in the earth. Harry looked wide-eyed, awed at the display. It was impressive, and very useful in the right hands. So he fixed up a poker face and asked, illusions and conjuration. Amora nodded at that and said, along with alchemy, mind magic and energy manipulation. Harry smiled at her. Then turning to Heimdall he said, all right. I will give you the casket. In return I want books detailing how to create and use illusions, ing with the metal that King Odin's spear is made of. Give me that, and the casket is yours. Heimdall frowned at him, while Balder seethed on his baby chair. How dare this mortal demand anything of us? Amora was amused. This mortal just asked for Uru, the metal which Odin guards furiously and only grants to a few of his favored soldiers, other than his family. She thought, remembering Hela and her hammer. Speaking of Hela, this mortal does remind me of Hela a lot. The feel of their magic is similar. I should keep an eye on this. 1. We'll have to discuss this with our king. Are you open to negotiations? Heimdall asked. Harry thought over it for a few seconds and said, it's fine. As long as King Odin himself comes to negotiate and you leave the screaming baby behind. I'm here in person. He should grant me the same courtesy, should he not? Heimdall nodded at Harry. He said, I will give him your message. We shall meet once again, Sorcerer Supreme. Well, the negotiations did happen, lasting 3 weeks. But only because Odin refused the metal Uru. Harry had asked for enough Uru to make 2 of those spears. But Odin refused, saying that the metal will kill a mortal like him. Harry had then said, well, if it kills me, you can just take it back home. Spoiler alert, it didn't kill him. Odin gave Harry enough Uru to make 1.5 spear, with the caveat that if he is unable to use the metal, it'll be returned in 100 years. Odin then told him that Uru cannot be forged through normal fires, and requires the heat of a sun to even melt it, the bastard. Harry used a spell the Ghost of Merlin. In his previous universe had taught him, Caelesti Flamme, meaning heavenly flames. This spell produces the hottest flames possible, just below Amaterasu of the Japanese. Amaterasu literally burns everything and turns everything it touches to ash, though, which was not useful for Harry. Harry kept the Uru aside, after proving to Odin that he can use it and forge it. He just didn't have anything to make yet. As for the cedar, Harry got 2 books detailing illusions and their uses in battle. He had to make a vow to not teach it to any mortals other than his family, but he didn't mind it. Harry gave them the casket. He had gotten everything he wanted from it in the first year itself. He could replicate the casket if he wanted, but it was not needed. He had filled 50 Icipho pellets with the energy of the casket. As a precaution, Kamar Taj, the 15th of May 1336 AD. In the last 400 years, since the Battle of Tonsberg, the dragon population had come to 20. The original 3 dragons were still alive, but the females had stopped laying eggs. Their children died of natural causes though. The children of the oldest dragons had lived till the age of 300 each before succumbing to old age. While their mothers were in their 8th century with the father in 10th century, and still going strong. Phoenixes were already immortal, so he didn't have to worry about their deaths. But he did get to collect a lot of their tears and ashes. He tried asking for their blood, but the glare all 49 phoenixes along with the 2 dragons that were there, had scared him off. He might be the master of death, but he's not going to mess with phoenixes. The Noondus on the other hand had the biggest growth. The average lifespan of a normal Noondu was 90 years. But thanks to the high magic levels on Avalon, which was almost completely pure, along with the Philosopher's Stone which powered the wards, the Noondus, along with the other animals, had gotten stronger, and had an increase in their lifespan. The Noondus now lived for 130 years at average, along with hippogriffs, while the Thestrals lived for 200 years. Although, Felix had somehow become immortal. At least, he can't die of natural causes. Harry had hypothesized that it was a combination of the magical density of the island, the healing pit water that he bathed in, and bonding with Harry. Hell, even the livestock had gotten bigger and stronger. He found some more new animals in the last 400 years. A blessing, which is a group of unicorns, was moved into the forest, close to the phoenixes. Thankfully, there were no acromantula, as far as he could find. On this earth, over the years, many of the older Noondus and dragons had died, which enabled him to harvest the Noondus for poison, meat, hide and bones. Most of the Noondu meat was given to the dragons, eating only a little himself. It was bloody delicious, when made with a curry. The rest he gave to the Thestrals. The hide was kept aside for treatment to make an armor, while the Noondu breath, or poison, was just stored. He didn't have anyone to use it on, but he might still make an antidote to prevent poisoning anyone friendly. He had also built up an immunity to it. He had decided to not harvest the dragons for anything other than their heart and blood. They might take offense to Harry defiling them. The heart was only taken because it had a lot of life energy. They made into the perfect ward stones when buried in the ground for a few centuries, and it also improved the quality of the produce in the area the heart is buried in. Kamar Taj. It was a warm summer afternoon, and Harry was watching over the training of the new recruits. Usually, the Order of the Mystic Arts receives an average of 10 new students per year. But thanks to an attack by Shumagorth a few months ago, a big village in northern Europe was destroyed. It took 2 minutes for the London Sanctum Masters to detect the breach, and 3 more minutes for the backup to arrive. So when the attack was finally stopped, with Shumagorth banished, the total population of the 600-person village was down to 29. Of those 29, 9 were children from ages 3 to 14, while 4 were babies. 2 were old people, and the remaining 14 people were of old enough age to take care of the rest. When Harry explained what they did to the villagers and what happened, one young lady, about 17 years old, stepped forward, bowed and said, "Can you teach us, Master?" Harry turned to her, took her chin in his hand and pulled her upwards. He looked in her eyes and sent a small legilimency probe in her mind. Like the probes the bastard Snape used to use on the students, Harry only checked emotions. There was pain, anger, sadness, grief, which then gave way to determination with a small amount of thirst for vengeance. He asked her, "What is your name?" "Minerva, Master," she answered. Harry nodded and asked, "Why do you want to learn?" Minerva sniffled a little, wiped her eyes and said, "My parents are dead. The one I was to be wed is dead. The only one I have now are these people. I want to protect them the best I can. If learning this witchcraft can help me do it, then I will try my hardest." Harry smiled at her, despite her words, and said, "Anyone willing is taught the mystic arts. It depends on you if you can learn it. But, beware, it will be a difficult journey." So it was that Harry gained 9 new students on the same day. He promised the 13-year-olds who wanted to learn too, that he will take them on as soon as they're 16 and still want to learn. He was watching all 9 of those students, along with a few of the older students, try and produce a sling ring portal. There were a few portals formed, a few sparks from most of them. However, everyone produced something, except Minerva. Minerva was determined. He'll give her that, but she was too fixed in her ways. She was raised a Christian, which meant for 17 years she's been told that what she's doing right now is dealing with the devil. Those conflicting feelings were stopping her from producing the barest flicker of a spark. The masters, who taught the lesson, were always told to let the students set their own pace. Not to scold someone if they're too slow, nor to point someone out if they can't do something. So Harry called out, "Class dismissed, everyone. Please empty the training ground." All the students started ping their brows and leaving to the opposite direction. Harry once again called out, "Minerva, can you come here for a moment?" Minerva sighed, and turned around. She knew this was coming. "I'm going to get kicked out of here," she thought. Harry nodded to the masters, telling them that he's got the situation handled, and turned to Minerva, who was standing in front of him with her head bowed low. Harry put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Do you remember what I told all of you, the first day I brought you here?" Minerva looked up at him, confused, and asked, "What?" "You said a lot of things that day, Master." Harry smiled at her, softly. She reminded him of Hermione at these times. Read books with a gusto, inhaled knowledge, but too stuck up in her way to change anything about herself. It was an endearing quality, even if sometimes annoying. "Open your mind, Minerva. Open your mind. I'll be waiting for you here, Minerva. So see you in 3 minutes." Harry said to her. Minerva looked confused for a minute. "Wah-ah," she asked, but couldn't complete her sentence as Harry created a portal right behind her and gently pushed her through it. Waving cheekily at her, Harry closed the orange glowing portal. Where was it this time? Harry heard from behind him. Turning around, he saw his most senior member, and currently his closest friend, Manish. He was a Nepali resident, who came to Kamar Taj as a family tradition. Every male member, and most of the female members, of his family has at some point learned the mystic arts in Kamar Taj. Some stayed there until their deaths, hers went back to their lives and lived peacefully. Manish had been the guardian of the Kamar Taj library for the last 30 years. Manish, Harry greeted and said, Sahara. The deserts are especially warm this time of the day. Manish chuckled at that, already used to his friend's quirks. Ever since finding out that one student was stuck on portals for 3 days, with no progress, and not even able to make mandala weapons, Harry had taken it into his own hands and sent him on the top of a mountain while just saying, meet me in 3 minutes. The student returned in 2 minutes, 38 seconds. Knowing that this method works, Harry used this every time someone was stuck, usually sending them to places of extreme temperatures or heights. So deserts, tundras, or mountains. One of these days, a student is going to blow up on you. Manish warned, light-heartedly. Harry chuckled and said, hey, each and every person I've sent on a trip has thanked me. What's the fastest? 2 minutes. 1.5. Ma. Nish took out a small scroll from his sleeves and answered, 1 minute and 39 seconds. It was Laura, bless her soul, from 24 years ago. Harry smiled warmly, but sadly, at her memory. She had died while fighting with a hell demon of Mephisto, whom she killed in return. The demon, not Mephisto. Harry was about to say something when sparks began to spin in front of him. Harry turned towards it. It took a few seconds, but the portal stabilized and Minerva fell through it, dropping unconscious as soon as she was through. Probably a heat stroke. Harry started layering cooling charms and the basic healing charms on her body and head. He turned to Manish and said, note it down, my friend. She broke the record by 4 seconds. Manish just shook his head and did just that. His friend was smart and intuitive, but crazy. 20 years later, Harry was fed up of staying in Kamar Taj. Even if he could go anywhere he wanted, he felt trapped. Even Felix could freely roam Avalon by himself. No one dared to attack him there, as he was known to be the Harry's friend. Harry had continued his visits, going once or twice a month to visit all the animals on the island. He even visited the mermaids and the CS. Serpent that had decided to make its home near the island. It stayed on the west side of the island, keeping the eastern beaches for Harry. So far, he hadn't shown Avalon to anyone. Not even Manish and Minerva. He just didn't trust them that much to not harm the island. Not anything personal, but he just didn't trust humans like that anymore. They knew that Harry had a sanctuary for the magical animals. And they'd even met with Felix along with the rest of the masters. He had shown them Felix so they'd know to contact him if they find any such animal, which is obviously magical, in the wilderness. So far, only Nifflers were found through the Order. Speaking of the Order, Harry had called Minerva and all of the masters of the mystic arts, excluding the Sanctum Masters, to his office, which had been expanded just for this purpose. Manish had perished of old age a few months ago, so it included the new librarian, John White, a Britisher who lost his family to Dormammu's attack. I have called you here because I am retiring soon. I've been the Sorcerer Supreme for 600 years, and now I think it's time I rest. Harry paused and gulped nervously. There was this one change he was going to make in the Order of Mystic Arts, which even Merlin had suggested he do. He said, before I go, there are a few things I'd like to share with the Masters which were until today only known to the Sorcerer Supreme. My master, Master Merlin told me these things before he passed on the mantle to me. I was going to tell only Minerva of this, as she is my successor, but then I realized, if she dies before any successor can be named, then no one will know these things. Harry then brought out the Eye of Agamotto and the Book of Cagliostro. He said, these 2 artifacts are 2 of the only things forbidden for all the masters, other than the Sorcerer Supreme, and for good reason. The book contains rituals designed to utilize the energy from Dormammu's dimensions. It also has a ritual to bring Dormammu into our world, which, as everyone knows, is a bad idea. Trust me, the guy does not quit. Harry had fought Dormammu thrice in the 600 years he'd been the Sorcerer Supreme. Dormammu always found one or the other to be the doorway into this dimension. Harry had managed to defeat him all these times. The first time doing it barely. Dormammu had millions of years of experience behind him, which even scared Harry for a while. Thankfully, being the Master of Death meant he could not die, and that sort of baffled Dormammu. The other item, as you all know, is called the Eye of Agamotto. You only know that the eye is a powerful object made by Agamotto. Harry paused here and took a deep breath. He used an illusion spell to show an example of a black hole and said, before this universe even began, there was a singularity. A star so dense that even light could not escape from it. Nothing could. Everything in this universe currently present was a part of that singularity once. The Scion then showed the singularity bursting and spreading apart. Everyone gasped, looking at the 3D image of 6 bright colorful gems, which were glowing softly. Harry continued, when the universe was born, the singularity burst open and formed into 6 ingots, each ingot controlling an aspect of existence. Space, time, reality, mind, power and soul. Together, they are called the Infinity Stones. Each time he named a stone, the same one in the illusion glowed brighter to signify its presence. Harry gestured to the Eye of Agamotto and said, this eye contains the Time Stone. And the responsibility of this order, from the moment Agamotto established it, is to protect this stone from outside hands at all costs. We have protected this eye, and the planet for thousands of years. So don't stop doing it now. He looked at the masters to see everyone afraid of the eye, then turned to Minerva and said, Minerva, this stone and the eye will be your responsibility. It will be your job to make sure that no one other than the loyal members of Kamar Taj can use this. And be careful, no one can misuse this artifact. It's too dangerous. Even I am scared of the Infinity Stones. Minerva nodded solemnly. Harry had already collected about 50 of the Icipho pellets filled with the Time Stone energy, as a precaution. No one knows when he'll need it. And knowing my luck, I definitely will. He then told T.H.M. about the different aliens he'd encountered, which almost baffled the Masters, but they had already been desensitized towards surprises. Asgardians, Kree, and Jotuns. He also warned them that if 3 outer planetary races exist, more definitely do. Harry had met Kree when they were surveying the planet. The Kree, when they saw him flying, had attacked him unceremoniously, which Harry defended against by crashing one of their ships, leaving the other to retreat as a warning to their race. He found the crashed Kree ship and took it to Avalon for studying. He did find that they had already messed with some humans' genetics, giving them powers, resulting in the Inhumans race living in hiding. They were not a danger to regular humans, so he did not interact with them. He had found a lot of such stuff, which definitely belonged to aliens, and moved it to Avalon for studying. He'd combined his 24th century knowledge, technology, along with the Kree systems found in the ship, and built computers and fixed the spaceship. What? Who doesn't want to go to space? Soon, Harry said his goodbyes and left to his island. He'd told only Minerva that he was truly immortal. The rest believed that being Sorcerer Supreme had some benefits, which served him just as well. Minerva knew to contact him if there's ever a need. She could handle all the major demons and extra-dimensional monsters. If Dormammu came back, only then he'd be called, and that's only if she couldn't handle it herself. She was pretty strong. Harry spent the next few years getting used to his original magic. He had been NDING on sorcery a lot these last few hundred years. And he also had to get used to using his body for combat again too. He couldn't always use magic to get out of situations. He spent the next few centuries, mostly in isolation, occasionally going out to mingle with the people, meet up with Minerva, or just getting laid on every continent. It was a matter of pride to him. Other than Avalon, Harry had slept with a woman on every continent and in most countries. The most interesting thing to happen during the next 600 years was Odin coming back to Earth, again, and placing another Infinity Stone on Earth. Like one wasn't enough, he decided not to mess with the stone, in case Odin was keeping an eye on it, and leave it as is. Which he was sure would come back to bite him in the ass, but he did collect 50 pellets of energy from the cube-like container of the space stone. They amplified the power of his sling portals, meaning he could now teleport to anywhere, even places he hadn't been to before. Which he hadn't tried yet, as he didn't have a destination in mind. The next interesting thing was a lone Asgardian moving to Earth in the 11th century. Harry didn't bother him much, except telling him to always use protection. Demigod half-Asgardians were soon not needed on top of everything that is already here. Most of his years till the 20th century were spent just living his life. Fell in love with a few women, and even married some of them, and then faked his death, leaving them a lot of money. It was life as usual for him. That was before the space stone was disturbed from its place in Norway and moved to Germany. Bloody Nazis. Even changing universes was not enough to get rid of Nazis. It had been 4 years since World War II began in earnest and 3 years since the Red Skull had removed the Tesseract from its hiding place. The Nazi Germany had invaded Poland in 1939, which led to the UK along with its crown colonies and France to declare war on Nazi Germany. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister and head of a coalition government in May 1940. Despite the defeat of its European allies in the first year of the war leading to the Dunkirk evacuation, Britain and its empire continued the fight alone against Germany. Churchill engaged industry, scientists and engineers to advise and support the government and the military in the prosecution of the war effort. Harry, who now had brown hair and hazel eyes, along with a pointier chin, was now known to the British Empire as simply Harry Potter. A man of noble birth, named after his ancestor, Henry Potter, which was one of Harry's previous names. A few centuries ago, Harry knew that he might have to have actual identities to live on this planet peacefully. So, in 18th century, he had met with the ruling monarch and bought a lordship. He gifted the king with a sword that he made, using normal steel, but goblin forging. It wasn't actually a magical sword, but it was tougher than a normal sword. After that, he bought some land, built a manor and continued traveling to and from the island. It was 220 years of just living and faking his own death, changing memories so that other people think he had a son, or a nephew, or just the son of a relative. That later takes over the lordship. Having different appearances was child's work for Harry thanks to his glamour bracelet. Leaving paperwork was easy, due to the absence of high-level computers. Even MI5 believed him, and gave the latest Harry a consultant position. He was smart, rich, and he had good battle tactics. He had already served in India as a colonel of the British Army for 10 years. Glamour locket helped to age yourself peacefully. He had to hold himself back a lot, in strength as well as speed. But he managed it. Due to the World War II, Harry was sent to America to help back up Agent Peggy Carter from UK's Government Code and Cipher School. She was a code breaker for British Royal Military since 1939 and was one of the best. She had left for USA a few years ago, as a consultant to the Allied Forces Agency SSR, which was formed to specifically fight the Nazi Science Division, Hydra. While there, Agent Carter had saved the life of the scientist Dr. Abraham Erskine, who was forced to work for Hydra, which is why Harry was going to be sent to SSR. MI5 believed that Dr. Erskine will be attacked during the presentation for the project that he's been working on, and the project work will be stolen. So Harry was sent to help save Dr. Erskine, and if that fails, the Project Rebirth, the super soldier serum, from Hydra's hands. Brooklyn, USA, the 24th of June 1943. It was 2 a.m. when Harry's plane landed. Peggy Carter, along with a few SSR agents, were there at the airport, waiting for him. Agent Potter, I didn't know MI5 was sending you, Peggy says, as soon as I meet her, along with the team sent to escort me, at the port. I give her a short smile and say, what can I say? The king was nervous about your report. I lose my smile for a while and continue. We believe that Erskine is going to be targeted during his presentation. Can't have that now, can I? The soldiers with Peggy picked up Harry's bags and start walking towards the car. Harry walks slowly with Peggy walking alongside him. How's the project going so far? Harry asked Peggy, once the soldiers are a little farther away. Peggy stopped walking, prompting Harry to do the same. She said, all the preparations are made. The list of approved invitees has been sent out to the White House. The machine is ready. Stark worked overtime to get it ready a week before the scheduled time. The last 4 days, he's been continuously running tests on it, making sure everything goes right. The Colonel Phillips has his eyes on a bully, who's a perfect soldier according to him. And Erskine is still banking on the skinny kid. Harry tilted his head to the side and asked, "The skinny kid?" "He's a 25-year-old man from Brooklyn. Father was in 107th Regiment during the Great War, got hit by mustard gas. Mother worked in TB ward as a nurse, she got sick after his birth. He has 17 medical disorders. But as the doctor likes to say, you have to look beyond the physical. He weighs at most of 50 kilograms. And has a height of 5 feet 5 inches. He's tried to get enlisted in 5 different cities, citing 5 different cities as his birthplace. He's got spunk, I'll give him that. And he doesn't know when to quit." Peggy explained. Reminds me of the old me." Harry thought to himself. "I'd probably have done the same thing, at least, before the war with Voldemort." "So when's Phillips goin' to make a final decision on the candidate?" Harry asked and started walking to the car, signaling that this will stop the conversation for a while. Peggy gave him a smile and said, "No idea. Hopefully they'll make up their minds soon. The senator is getting antsy." The two get in the car with the 2 soldiers, who drove them towards a training camp. The board read, Camp Lehigh. It was a decently sized camp, allotted by the United States government to the Strategic Scientific Reserve, or the SSR. As said before, it was a joint operation of the Allied forces to combat Hydra, but mostly concentrated in the Americas. It was 3 in the morning, when they reached the base, so Peggy showed him to his room, and went to sleep herself. She shouldn't have come this late in the first place, but I'll get kicked in my nuts if I try to tell her that. Harry thought to himself, Riley. The next morning at 7, Harry freshened up and went towards where all the sound was coming from. There were about 20 new cadets, doing a physical warm-up. Just by one glance at the group, Harry was able to identify the runt, Steve Rogers, who Agent Carter told him about. He was barely hanging on to the warm-up, while the others were going pretty strong. There was one cadet, who was completely confident in his abilities to the point of arrogance. He could see Colonel Phillips and Dr. Abraham Erskine of Germany talking to the side, so he joined them. "Need to make a decision quickly, Dr. Erskine," the colonel said. Dr. Erskine was about to say something, when Harry interrupted them. He said, "Colonel Phillips, Dr. Erskine." The two turned towards Harry and Phillips smiled widely at him, which Harry returned and spread his arms apart. He came and hugged Harry tightly. He said, "You can call me Chester, kid. How's MI5 been treating you?" "Pretty good," Harry replied, returning the hug with his own. He then left the hug and then said, "I would have called you by your name, Colonel, but right now I'm here for an official reason." Phillips sighed and turned towards Erskine and said, "Dr. Erskine. This here's Agent Harry Potter. He's from MI5, from all the way from London." "Agent Potter, this is Dr. Abraham Erskine from Germany. He's the one who's heading this project." Erskine curiously offered Harry his hand for a shake, which Harry took. Erskine said, "Good to meet you, Agent Potter." Harry shook his hand and said, "Nice to meet you too." "Dr. Erskine, how do you know him, Colonel?" Erskine asked, referring to the familiarity Phillips showed. Harry smiled at him, but stayed silent as Phillips explained. "His uncle and I knew each other. I met him in the 20s when I was posted as an ambassador in London. Sirius Potter was my handler. If I knew they were sending you, Harry, I'd have come pick you up." Erskine smiled softly and turned to Harry, who asked, "I wanted it to be a bit of a surprise. So what was the big argument about?" Phillips gestured towards the cadets and said, "We can't make up a mind on who to select for the project. I am voting for Hodge while the doctor here is thinking about Rogers." "You are serious about it, aren't you?" He asked the question to Erskine. Erskine smiled amusedly and said, "I'm more than thinking about this. He's the clear choice." Phillips looked at Erskine in alarm, and said, "Abraham. He's 90 pounds. If I'm being generous, you stick a needle in his arm. It's gonna come out of the other side." Meanwhile Peggy was drilling the soldiers through different exercises and shouted, "Up!" All the cadets immediately standing up, Steve completing his representative and then standing, struggling with it. Phillips looked at him pitifully and said, "Look at him. He's making me cry." Erskine smiled at Harry and Colonel and said, as I've repeatedly said before, I am looking for qualities beyond the physical. Look, do you have any idea how much groveling I've had to do in front of Senator what's his name? Throw me a bone, please. Hodge follows every order given, he's passed every test. Phillips pleaded. Harry watched it silently, judging the soldiers himself, and did not like what he saw of Hodge. Erskine turned to the cadets and said, Brant. And yes, I know. But he's got heart, Colonel. I know it. Plus, Hodge is a bully. Harry interrupted the argument before it could get any hotter, and said, why not a test, Chester? You don't create a soldier who's not willing to lay down his life for the SSR, let alone enhance and train him. Let the test speak for itself. Phillips looked intrigued and turned to the soldiers. He picked up a fake grenade and said, you're right, Harry. And Doctor, the war is not earned by niceness, it's won with guts. Grand. Shouting that, Phillips threw the grenade in the midst of the soldiers. Harry checked everyone for reactions. Most of the soldiers, including Hodge, jumped away, afraid for their lives, which Harry didn't exactly blame them for. Not everyone is a hero. Peggy moved to jump on the grenade, not knowing it was a fake. But didn't need to, as there already was a body covering the grenade. 90-pound Steve Rogers was curled up on top of the grenade and yelled, get back. Harry snorted and walked towards Rogers, ignoring Phillips and Erskine bickering, and said, get up mate. That was a test, and you passed with flying colors. The grenade's fake. Steve looked up at him and asked, that was a test. Harry simply nodded at him and gave him a hand. Steve got up and looked around, creasing his brows. Peggy was walking towards Steve, concerned for his life. She didn't know about the test. Steve looked at Harry confused and asked, I'm sorry sir, but who are you? Peggy and Harry snorted at his blunt question. She said, this is Agent Harry Potter of MI5. He's here to back me up. Agent Potter, this is Steve Rogers. Steve looked a little jealous at Harry, as Harry was fairly built, and looked more than comfortable with Peggy, who was smiling at Agent Potter. Harry shook Steve's hand and looked him over. Now that he was a little close, he looked exactly like what Harry looked like when he was 17. It was only thanks to the Hallows merging with him, along with the healing pits that he had gotten to be 6 feet tall and more than a little fit. The heart-shaped herb helped too. Steve was still thin, so it was understandable that Phillips doubted him. But Harry had seen what the super soldier serum had done to Schmidt, the Hydra leader, so he knew that Steve would be alright. The SSS application was like a ritual. There were ritual ingredients, the serum, then there's energy application, the Vita rays. And then there's an intent. Any ritual usually requires you to be neutral in intent, if you can't stay calm and positive. Bad intentions modify the ritual with unknown consequences. Which is why even Peter Pettigrew, when he was reviving Voldemort, was calmly doing everything according to the instructions. Harry didn't find this out until he met Nicholas Flamel's ghost and got taught everything about rituals. They were still legal in the 14th century, so Nicholas had gone through a lot of them. Nicholas told him something which Harry always kept in mind. There's always a price in magic. Everything has a price. Even small spells took a little bit of your magic to work the spell. Bigger rituals used your magic, emotions, as well as something more. Coming back to it, the serum amplifies your character. The good becomes better, while the bad becomes worse, as the doctor liked to say. Plus every ritual has a price. Schmidt did not sacrifice anything of himself for strength. And he undertook the ritual with bad intentions. Which is why, he did get the strength he asked for, but the ritual took a sacrifice from him without asking. He was really fond of his face, proud of it even, so the ritual disfigured him. If he was proud of his UAL prowess, he would have lost his bollocks, libido, or even his fertility. It's predictable and unpredictable at the same time. But stay. Vey was doing this not because he wanted to become stronger, but because he wanted to save people. There were only good intentions, and he could stay calm during the serum injection. The pain will not mess with it, Harry was sure of that. And the price asked will be very low, as compared to what it took from Schmidt, or as he's now known, Red Skull. Harry smiled at Steve and slapped a hand on his shoulder. He said, "Yep, this one will do all right. Take care of him, won't you, Peggy?" "Of course, sir," Peggy said, smiling at Steve softly. That done, Harry went around the camp, looking over the aiming and helping a few with their hand-to-hand combat. It was all silent for the rest of the day, as Hydra hadn't come to the American continent yet, focusing more on Germany and the rest of the Europe. England was a little safer thanks to the British Royal Military and the MI5 monitoring everything. But there were still bombings happening everywhere. They just hadn't captured England yet. The 22nd of June 1943. The next day, early morning, Harry first went to Avalon to visit Felix. Felix had been with Harry for more than 1,000 years now. Even Harry didn't know the exact age. He hadn't bothered counting the years that he'd been here. He knew that he had landed in the past in 8th century and found Felix at the end of the same. But that was it. So, for Harry, other than the Phoenixes, Felix was the only companion who was with him for such a long time. And so, Felix was his best friend. They could understand each other. Oh, Felix didn't suddenly gain the ability to talk or something. They just connected. Harry could get these sort of feelings from Felix no matter where he goes. Even when he's a continent apart. He assumed that Felix could feel the same, having come to Harry when he needed him. The dragons now lived peacefully, the mountains being their homes. Only Harry, Felix and the Phoenixes were allowed to visit them, the rest becoming dinner. While the Noondoos, unicorns, Thestrals and the hippogriffs were staying isolated from each other. Harry did fly on top of the Thestrals and hippogriffs once in a while, enjoying it thoroughly. Surprisingly, Harry had found a few magical snakes on the island. And he had no idea how they reached there. The Ashwinder was a serpent who has deep connections to fire. So how they crossed water, Harry didn't know. And the snakes weren't telling. They just said that their ancestors warned them of the humans. Similar with the Opal Eye, they did talk a lot, Harry still being a Parselmouth, they revered him. As for the plants, the ts of all the dragons that had died on the island were buried on different plots of lands all around Avalon. It had an amazing side effect of making the trees and plants grow bigger and healthier than normal. The inherent life energy, Chi, in the hearts was responsible for it. The produce tasted amazing, fruits becoming sweeter, coconuts having sweeter water. Even the fresh water lakes on the island started producing better fishes. The animals all loved it, which meant even dragons didn't complain much about the hearts. After spending an hour on Avalon, Harry went back to Camp Lehigh. At exactly 11 a.m., Harry, along with Colonel Phillips and Dr. Erskine, took a car, along with a few guards in civilian clothes, and went out to the city of Brooklyn. So where exactly will the procedure take place? Harry asked from the back seat. Not having a clue of where they were going. He could have just investigated a little and found out, but he didn't want to break the trust they had on him. Phillips turned back towards him, from the front passenger seat, and said, "Oh, you'll see. It's close." Harry scowled at him, while Erskine simply shook his head. He said, "Let's just let him have his fun, why don't we?" Harry smiled and nodded at him. It took 15 more minutes, but at 11:30 a.m., the car finally stopped in front of an antique shop, and the three got out. They entered the store silently, keeping a vigilant eye around, and nodded at the store owner. The owner smiled at Phillips, one hand below the table, most likely holding a gun, and said, "Wonderful weather this morning, isn't it?" Phillips looked at her calmly and said, "Yes, but I always carry an umbrella." The lady then pressed a button near her table, which caused the shelf behind her to slide away. It showed a door, which led to a secret underground facility. "Really cliché, Chester," Harry commented. Phillips grumbled, "Oh, shut up. We didn't have much time to set anything else up." Erskine led them down towards his lab, where Harry saw Howard Stark and a few more engineers working on the machine which will inject the serum into Steve. Probably doing the last-minute checkups. There were still a few hours till the procedure. So Harry went to a corner and stood Virgil. He knew for a fact that Erskine will be attacked today. And if it happened, it will happen right after the procedure. So, Harry kept an eye on all the guests that kept on coming. He had already spotted 3 spies from somewhere, but waited to see if more were coming. If Hydra had 3 spies so close to the higher-ups in US, there were bound to be more. About 10 minutes before 1 a.m., Steve and Peggy entered through the door that everyone came through. It took a few minutes for Steve to greet every important person, even amongst the VIPs present, including one of the spies. And taking photographs for the before, after advertising of the Project Rebirth. All this time, Harry kept a covert eye on the spies, 2 of which knew each other, if the discreet eye contact was anything to go by. The third one was definitely from another organization than the other 2. Once Steve entered the Vita Ray chamber, Harry tuned them out, and entered the astral plane to view the procedure. Time slowed down to a crawl almost immediately. Everyone was slower than Harry, who was now floating in his astral form. The doctors were all frozen in place, moving almost as slow as snails. While one of the spies had his hand close to his waist, ready to pull out a gun, which he shouldn't have inside the room. Harry turned back to the VR chamber, seeing something extremely incredible. Steve's astral form was glowing. He was glowing yellow with what Harry could sense was life energy. The Vita rays that Erskine and Stark had boasted about was none other than life energy. Erskine had somehow found a way to synthesize life energy itself. Bloody amazing. He's absorbing all that life energy, and making it his own. The serum is simply the bonding agent. Erskine, you mad genius. Harry spoke out loud, but no one heard him, thanks to being in the astral plane. But, unlike what martial artists of Kowloon did, Steve was not actually learning to absorb the Kai, he was simply doing it. Which meant that he couldn't be able to actually use said energy for purposes other than enhancing his body. That was actually a permanent effect, and won't change no matter what. Except if they produce some sort of anti-serum. Harry's body was standing still during all this, with eyes closed. So Harry, in his astral form, went around the room and observed everyone present with a closer eye. Other than the 3 spies, 2 of which were definitely Hydra, and 1 was most probably Russian, there was a senator who looked like he wanted to experiment on whoever Steve became after this procedure. Another senator wanted to wait and see what happens. If Steve became a super soldier, and the army general refused to send him on field, he wanted to turn Steve into his personal dance monkey for the purpose of selling war bonds. Which, while useful, is not what Steve was being reborn for. Seeing everything he wanted to see, Harry returned to his body, making time start at its normal speed again. Relativity. 50%. Howard Stark yelled out and then again shouts, 60. 70%. Warning Dr. Erskine of the concentration of the power levels being used in the Vita ray emitter. As soon as Stark reached 70%, Steve started screaming out in pain. He yelled, "AAGGGHHHH." Harry thought to himself, the amount of life energy in his body is most probably changing him, increasing his body mass. Such a sudden increase in body mass, along with strength, most definitely must have caused the pain. "Stephen," Erskine shouted in worry, while Peggy screamed at Stark, "Shut it down." Bad idea. If they shut it down now, Steve will most definitely become stronger than any normal human, but he'll still stay skinny and be in so much pain that it'll cause him death. His body won't be able to handle it yet, Harry thought, and continued observing. Stark started moving to shut it down, but Steve yelled out of the chamber, "No. Keep going. I can take it," stopping him on his tracks. Harry raised an eyebrow at that. He knew Steve was stubborn, but not this much. Erskine turns to Stark and shouts, "Shut down the reactor, Stark. He won't be able to handle it." Steve, still screaming in pain, once more yelled out, "Keep going. Please, don't stop." Stark started increasing the power levels, ignoring Dr. Erskine and Peggy. The audience in the balcony all lean a little bit forward, showing how much they cared about one of their soldiers. Even Phillips, who showed a little worry over Steve's screaming, was leaning forward in interest. 100%, Stark shouted, for others' sake. Although it was unnecessary, it was still appreciated. The Vita ray chamber started glowing white, now in the physical plane itself. The machine then started overloading itself, to the surprise of Stark and the other engineers, and after one final glow from the inside of the chamber, making most of the people there turn away, it shut down. The door to the chamber opened, dropping Steve, who was now taller and generally bigger than before, out of it. He now looked completely muscly and looked like a perfect soldier. It was like looking at himself right after eating the purple flower from Wakanda. Only at a lesser extent. Steve, Peggy, Stark and Erskine all yelled out and went forward to catch him. Harry remained behind, keeping an eye on the spies. One by one, all the visitors from the balcony started coming down. The gun-wearing spy, who had introduced himself as Fred Clemson from the State Department, moved away from the group, towards Erskine's station, where the last of the test tubes filled with the serum was being kept. Knowing that he'll steal the serum, which will most definitely deprive the British government of a super soldier, Harry quick. Kaylee conjured a test tube with a liquid with the same color and thickness of the serum, and switched it with the test tube that Clemson had picked up, and hid it inside his jacket. MI5 had sent him here for this secondary objective. Obtain a sample of the super soldier serum for the British government and give his opinion on the application of it. He agreed with it, because USA can't be the only P.O.R. on Earth with a super soldier on call. So he was going to take the serum to London, and help them select and enhance one soldier. His job for the British government done, Harry kept an eye on the spy. But before he could do anything, the man pressed something in his hand and detonated a small explosive device in the observation room. Boom! The explosion happened immediately, throwing everyone to the floor, while Clemson pulled out a gun and aimed somewhere behind Harry. Crack! A shot rang out, indicating a gun. Harry looked towards the spy, cursing himself for losing his touch. He was running outside, the other government officials letting him go, as no one else, other than the soldiers, had a weapon. The guards that went to follow after him were being shot down. Looking towards Steve again, Harry saw that it was Erskine who was shot. Running towards Erskine, Harry saw him talk something to Steve and die before he even reached there. "Damn you, Erskine," Harry whispered. Steve, who was crying, suddenly became determined, and started running after the spy, to catch him. Peggy following behind him. Knowing he will take care of it, Harry turned towards Call Phillips and shouted, "Call Phillips, shut the facility down." Phillips, trusting in him, gave the order to shut the doors, trapping everyone inside. That done, Harry went closet to him and whispered, "If there's one spy so close to the government officials, there are bound to be more." Phillips, sad and angry at the loss of a friend, gave out the orders, "Don't let anyone out. Check everyone. If anyone refuses to comply, arrest them for questioning, immediately. I don't care if they're the VP himself." The soldiers, the only ones with guns, started collecting everyone and took them for individual check-ups for credentials and some minor questions. Harry himself started inconspicuously walking towards the second Hydra spy, making sure not to spook him. The Russian spy will get caught by the soldiers, but it was not that serious. Hydra was. The second spy, who introduced himself as Georg Strucker, was talking with a lieutenant, showing his ID proofs. Harry knew he was a spy, most definitely, and confirmed it with a deep legitimacy scan. So, he looked towards Phillips and caught his eye. "Spy. 5 heads." Harry signed towards him using the British military sign language he had taught to Phillips in the guise of Sirius Potter. His uncle. It was just a few signs for a few words. Phillips widened his eyes, not unable to keep his surprise and anger in. "Capture." Phillips signed back, so Harry walked leisurely towards the spy, not looking at him, but behind him. Strucker looked at him once, dismissing him immediately, which was what Harry wanted. As soon as he was behind Strucker, Harry immediately put him in a chokehold using his significant super strength to keep it. Strucker tried resisting, but is not able to, for long and started losing consciousness. The lieutenant he was talking to pulled a gun out and trained it on Harry's head. He was about to shout an order, most likely to let him go, when Call Phillips came in towards Harry and pulled his own gun out. "Stand down, Lieutenant Bones," Phillips ordered. Bones reluctantly holsters his gun and turned towards Harry, just watching. The rest of the people, excluding the Russian spy, who was captured, watched Strucker struggling for a couple minutes, till he lost unconscious. Harry gently laid Strucker down, and started patting him, checking for weapons. Everyone was silently watching him work, no one saying anything. Suddenly, footsteps sounded around the base. indicating the return of Peggy and Steve, who had gone to capture Fred, the killer of Dr. Erskine. What happened? Peggy asked, looking at the unconscious Strucker. Phillips turned to her and said, Hydra spy, what happened on your end, Agent Carter? Dead, sir. Bit into a cyanide pill fixed into his teeth. The serum got destroyed in the fight. Steve explained in her stead. Potter. Phillips asked at that, surprised at this turn of events. On it. Bring me some forceps, Harry said, and immediately started slowly opening Strucker's jaw, making sure not to disturb the fake tooth if there was one. Once the jaw was fully opened, Harry saw that one of the teeth in the back of his mouth was actually fake. It actually looked different than the normal teeth. So Harry took the forceps a soldier provided him with, and gently pulled the fake tooth out. He then checked for a few more minutes, if there was any other fake tooth. Finding none, Harry got up. He's all yours. Interrogate him to your heart's content. Harry motioned towards Strucker, saying that Harry went towards Peggy, asking her what happened with the first spy. Turned out, Steve used High's new strength to pursue the spy's vehicle, on foot, and fought with him, restraining him in the process. But the spy swallowed a cyanide pill and killed himself, declaring his loyalty towards Hydra while dying. Bloody Nazis. Listening to her, and his job done, Harry left the facility with a few of the Camp Lehigh-based soldiers and went back to his room. It was one hell of an hour. Later, Harry found out that Steve was persuaded by Senator Brandt to perform as a stage monkey, punching an actor wearing Hitler costume, and dancing with scantily clad women. While Stark, Peggy, and the rest of the cadets were deployed to join the war effort for the SSR. 2 days later, at 7 in the morning, Agent Harry Potter left USA and returned to London, safely. As soon as he reached London, Harry went to the Buckingham Castle, taking the serum with him, for a meeting with General Sir David Petrie of the MI5, the King George VI of Britain, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Harry knocked on the door to the office of King George and waited to be called. 5 minutes of waiting later, an aide of the King's came out and said, "The King and his guests are waiting for you, Agent Potter." He LD have bloody asked me to enter before now then. Harry thought to himself. Ignoring the slight to him, Harry entered the room, with the aide announcing his presence. Inside the room were the King George, seated at the head of the rectangular table, his Queen, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon to his right, Prime Minister Churchill to his left. MI5 Director General, Sir David Petrie was seated to Churchill's left, along with the British Army Field Marshal, Alan Brooke. To the right of the Queen, sat her daughter Princess Elizabeth II, the heir to the throne. These were the only people, other than Harry himself, who were in the room. Frankly, Harry didn't even know why the princess was in the room. She was only 18 and had only just began to understand what war is. But whatever the king wishes. Harry too, okay note of the people present in a few microseconds, looked in the eyes of everyone and saluted to the king. He said, "Agent Harry Potter, reporting, as commanded, Your Majesty." King George nodded at him and said, "Please be seated, Agent Potter, and give me your report." Harry nodded at everyone and sat down opposite the king, where everyone could see him. He said, "Mission accomplished, sir. The SSR managed to complete the super soldier serum thanks to the continuous efforts of Dr. Abraham Erskine and Mr. Howard Stark. They made 2 vials full of serum, one of which was used to enhance Cadet Steve Rogers of the SSR. Here's my and Agent Carter's report on him." Saying that, Harry pushed a file towards Field Marshal Alan Brooke. He kept it aside to read later. Harry continued, "The Project Rebirth was successful, enhancing a 50-kilogram thin Steve Rogers to a man of 85 kilograms pure muscle. Unfortunately, what we suspected did happen. A spy managed to infiltrate the presentation arranged for the U.S. higher-ups, which resulted in the death of Dr. Abraham Erskine due to a gunshot. One spy was captured by me, while the other died after swallowing a suicide pill." Churchill interrupted Harry at this point and asked, "You checked the second spy for a pill?" Harry, along with everyone else on the table, stared at the only pure politician on the table like he was crazy, making him sit back down, suitably embarrassed. Harry turned towards the king again and continued, "Yes, I checked him for poison and removed a fake tooth that he had. On another note, I suspected this to happen, and swiped one of the test tubes of the serum with one I had fabricated. Harry removed the serum from his jacket and gave it to the MI5 Director General. Sir David Petrie looked at the blue-colored serum in the file and asked, "What happened to the fake serum?" Harry smiled at him and said, "The spy, who introduced himself as Fred Clemson, had a fight with the newest and currently only super soldier on our side, and lost. Clemson broke the file bare the docs, losing any chance for the US to check if it was the true serum." The king smiled at Harry and said, "Excellent work, Agent Potter. Excellent work. Now we can make our own super soldier." Harry, Petrie and Sir Brooke all frowned at the king, knowing that he meant well, but it was not plausible. Harry spoke up, "Your Majesty. If I may." The king nodded at him to continue, so Harry said, "I don't think using the serum right now is viable. The US has Steve Rogers, and if he gets drafted, it will be on behalf of the SSR, not US Army. If we bring out a new super soldier, the US will suspect us if espionage, however right they may be, it will lead to our collective failure in defeating the Nazis." Everyone nodded at that, even Churchill and the king. The princess still thinking over it. The Field Marshal Brooke turns to the king and says, "I agree with his assessment, Your Majesty. We will have to wait until at least the war is over to enhance a soldier to make sure America is not suspicious. And after the war is over, the super soldier won't be as much needed. So if I may make a suggestion, let's keep the serum on ice. Store it for future use, and when the next war comes, or when the need for a super soldier arises, we will enhance one of our own to fight for the cause." Churchill, the king, and the princess frowned at that, not agreeing, but Sir David Petrie spoke up. "I agree too, Your Majesty. At this point in war, we can't afford to make a new enemy in the US. Not while India is on a path to fight for freedom too. We can't afford to fight on more than one fronts with different enemies. For now, let's keep the serum on ice." The king remained silent for a minute, thinking, and said, "I think, I understand. I will allow this. Agent Potter, please give a report on the selection process for the Project Rebirth, along with the actual procedure." Harry nodded and started, "Yes, sir." Dr. Erskine repeated one sentence multiple times, both in front of me and with Agent Carter. "I am looking for qualities beyond the physical," he said. Plus he selected the skinny kid with lots of guts, one who hates war, but is willing to fight for the safety of others. So we need someone like him. It's best if they're just new recruits and haven't seen much battle. We can train them up to task later. As for the project procedure, here's what I've observed. Harry then proceeded to tell his captive audience about Vita Rays, and how it helped Steve. The king then asked if it was possible without the Vita Ray bombarding, as with Erskine dead. Only Stark knew what Vita Rays were, and he wasn't about to betray Erskine. So Harry said, "As per my limited knowledge of the human body as well as physics, which was a lie since he knew a lot, theoretically. The serum used Roger's life energy to slowly build up muscles and heal the body to peak condition, and then some. Vita Rays simply sped up the process, and made it so the whole building up of muscles happened within minutes. But that's just my hypothesis." The king and everyone else thought on it, and finally the king said, "Sir Petrie, have a sample of the serum taken in. See if your scientists can start working on replicating it. We will have to do the tests to see if we can actually use the serum we have. And keep it covert. No one other than us 7 are allowed to know about it. Except maybe our successors. But that's after they take the post. Anything else? No." Dismissed. Harry, along with the others, saluted to the royal family, and exited the office, Sir Petrie taking the serum with him in the custody of MI5. He put it in a suitcase he had brought for this purpose, being prepared. Harry went to his manor which he had been living in for 2 centuries now, as a Lord of Britain to freshen up. Poland. The 27th of August 1943. 2 months later, Harry had received a new mission. To infiltrate a Hydra base in Poland, where Johann Schmidt was reported to be seen, and if possible, capture or kill him. If not possible, he was to destroy the base completely. After 5 days of watching over the base, the infiltration was finally successful, as Harry had foregone wearing a disguise and just went in when invisible. He had planted explosives in different weak points of the base with a timer of 40 minutes, which he had considered enough to assassinate Schmidt and get out. So here he was, inside the main building, now visible, and wearing a Hydra uniform, walking like he belonged there, towards Schmidt's office. According to the rumor mill, Schmidt and his pet scientist, Dr. Arnim Zola, had unfortunately left to their main base 2 hours ago. So Harry was going to try and find any important information in his office. Harry used his lock picks, in case there were cameras, and used them to unlock Schmidt's office in this base. Silently opening the door, Harry looked inside, to find it empty of any person. So he went inside and started rummaging in the different drawers and cupboards. 15 minutes of searching later, Harry found something which shocked as well as scared him. Designs for a gun which don't fire bullets, but energy from something he called the Tesseract, which by looking at its photograph, Harry could tell, was the cube containing the space stone. Bloody hell, this is why he took the cube, Harry whispered. He takes the design and stores it in his pocket dimension, which he replaced his moleskin pouch with, and went on searching for more information. I should have bloody stolen the cube long ago. At least it would have been safer than it is now, at the hands of Nazis. Harry kept on, mumbling to himself. As soon as he finished looking through everything, but finding nothing more, Harry heard the door open. There, standing outside the office, right in the door, was Johann Schmidt, who was supposed to be in a plane on the way to the Alps right now. Bugger me sideways, Harry said to himself and started running towards Schmidt, hoping to overpower him. Schmidt, with surprising speed, pulled out a gun and fired a blue beam of energy at Harry at point-blank range. Despite trying to dodge the beam, it hit Harry in his face, after which Harry only saw black. Harry Potter was dead, again, only this time, his whole body was disintegrated, right down to every molecule. Pity, Johann Schmidt said to himself, as he watched Harry Potter's body get turned to atoms. He continued looking at Dr. Zola. I would have loved to interrogate the British scum. He got inside my office before anyone knew there was an intruder. Punish the guards, Zola. Yes, Herr Schmidt, Zola replied. 15 minutes later, as Zola and Schmidt once again took off to go towards the Alps, the base lit up in fire, telling the ones on the plane that there were explosives hidden. A real pity. He even managed to plant bombs before his inevitable death. Let's go. We'll send someone to clean this up later, Schmidt said to himself, and then to the pilot. 2 years after Odin's visit to Midgard, Harry was at Avalon, visiting for a few days. Getting stuck at Kamar Taj wasn't an ideal situation, so he made sure to take a break once in a while. He was also constant L.Y. searching for any sorcerer that could become a suitable successor. So far he hadn't found anyone that was Sorcerer Supreme material, or even close to it. There was one student, a Chinese legacy, me. Aining his family had a tradition to send their kids to study here. But he was not that serious about studying the mystic arts. Oh, he got strong enough to hold Oop against and maybe even defeat a Jotun, probably. But that was his limit. Plus he got tired real easily, which meant that even if his knowledge was superior to most masters, he couldn't cast spells for long. Harry had kept his P.R. Omise to Merlin and kept training students, but he also kept an eye out for promising students. Harry was tending to his herbal plants, that he used for potions, when he heard an alarm in his head. The London Sanctum was down, and the master dead. Harry started packing everything up, so he could go and help whoever goes to help the London Sanctum. 5 minutes later, Harry was wearing his Noondu hide battle robe, which was infused with dimensional energies from 10 different dimensions, and also some of his wizarding magic. It was now more resistant than even dragon hide. It looked like the traditional Kamar Taj robes, only brown in color. Taking his dagger pouch, Harry fixed it on his hip, put his axe, Angar and sword, Godric in his moleskin pouch. He could call it as soon as it is needed. So it was that 5 minutes after the London Sanctum was fallen, Harry left Avalon to Kamar Taj, firstly to check on the situation, and to take command. As soon as he stepped out of the portal, Harry saw a few masters running around like headless chicken, with only 7 of them staying calm and trying to think up a battle plan. Silence, Harry shouted, making everyone stop talking and moving. Master Harry, Chandra shouted in relief. He was the second in command of Kamar Taj, after Harry. "Master Chandra, can you tell me what has happened?" Harry asked politely. Chandra nodded, the other senior masters joining him, and said, "2 days ago, a book was stolen from the library by 7 of our current members. We were trying to stop a breach from the Hell Dimension from happening in the Americas when the book was taken. And didn't find out until 5 hours later, when we returned. Our librarian, Master Alex, was found dead." Harry frowned at the revelation. He thought, "I really should have a better security system." He shook his head and asked, "What happened offer, and what book was stolen?" Chandra gulped a little and said, "We tried scrying for the book, but it was invisible to us and we couldn't find the location. So we sent out 2 tracking teams, along with Master Hamir, to track down the former masters. They haven't come back yet, but we know they are alive and still searching. And about 5 minutes ago, the London Sanctum was attacked by these members and taken over. The book was the Book of Cagliostro, Master Harry." Harry took a deep breath and said, "No need to blame yourselves, masters. You have done well. I want teams 4 and 5 to go to the other 2 sanctums and guard it at all costs. If all 3 of the sanctums fall, let's just say, it's bad." The mentioned teams nodded and left towards the library to go through the portal, so Harry turned towards the remaining 15 masters, and 8 students, and said, "For the moment, we are at war with a rogue faction of sorcerers. Defending our realm is our highest priority, even at the cost of our lives. Chandra, Julian and Jamal, come with me. Others, guard Kamar Taj. The students will spend the time in the library, with at least 4 masters present at all times. Take care of this place until we return. And Chandra, don't forget your book." Everyone nodded at the orders and started collecting the stuff they might need. "Maybe I should put up new policies. Always keep your stuff on you, at all times." Harry waved his right hand and said, "Expecto Patronum. Master Hamir, come back to Kamar Taj and help defend it. The London Sanctum has fallen, so me and 2 others are traveling there to fight whatever threat there is." Saying that, Harry sent his Patronus message to track down Hamir, and waited for his team. Chandra, Julian and Jamal were his strongest subordinates other than the 3 masters of the sanctums. Jamal was from an African tribe, and was the best martial artist, with conjuring weapons as his best subject in sorcery. But his shields were weaker in return. He had the staff of the living tribunal as his relic. Julian was a Roman soldier, who had faked his death to get away from the constant wars and pillaging. He was the best at nothing, but was a jack of all trades. He had practiced every subject at least a little, from healing to necromancy. The second one was under strict supervision of Harry, to make sure nothing untoward happened. His relic was called the vaulting boots of Valtor. They could help the sorcerer jump on air. And lastly, Chandra. He was an Indian farmer. He lost his wife and son in a bandit raid, with his king not helping him at all. So he left the kingdom and traveled to the Himalayas to meditate. He had stayed at the Everest for 5 days, when finally Harry found him there and asked if he wanted to learn sorcery. Once he heard that some of the Hindu gods were actually sorcerers who ascended to godhood, he accepted. He was selected by the rituals of Shamhat Saraswati, a book that was written by goddess Saraswati herself when she was the second sorcerer supreme, after Agamotto. The book contained every ritual ever devised by Lady Saraswati, for every situation she could imagine. But the book needed to select you as a user for the rituals to actually work. Plus, even if you memorize the ritual completely, and follow it step by step, you won't succeed unless the book is with you. So it was quite a surprise that Chandra was selected by the book, but also not quite, as Chandra was a master of invocation and rituals. So, Harry and the 3 masters of Kamar Taj went through a portal Harry created to the London Sanctum. It dropped them off at a small village in London, at the outskirts of which was the castle, which was the London Sanctum. The castle was hidden from civilian eyes, as long as they don't look too closely. It was a precautionary method to prevent its pillaging during wars. Right now, the wards over it were barely hanging on, and the doors were caved in. One side of the building was caved in, but nothing other than that actually looked wrong. As soon as Harry thought that, a wave of dark magic came out of the forest to the sanctum's left. Harry cursed himself, as the feel of the magic was extremely similar to the one he felt on Merlin's head. He looked towards the source of the magic and saw a sort of cut in the space, like a breach between dimensions. The other side was dark, really dark, with some green, red and orange mixed in. Chandra, start preparing a ritual that can banish the Dread Lord, Dormammu. Harry orders immediately. Julian and Jamal were immediately on guard and brought out their weapons. Julian with 2 mandala shields, while Jamal brought out his staff. Chandra immediately sat down and started bringing out ingredients according to the Book of Saraswati. Harry, knowing that Chandra will be a prime target during a fight, brought out a Philosopher's Stone. This one was always kept on him, for cases such as this. He put the stone behind Chandra, buried in a small hole, and chanted, "In the name of the Vishanti, I, the Sorcerer Supreme, invoke thee, Agamotto, to protect thine servant. Shields of Seraphim, protect mine charge." Once Harry said the last syllable, a bright orange flash filled his vision for a second, and when it cleared, Chandra was surrounded by an orange opaque barrier. It was the Strange R version of the Shields of Seraphim that sorcerers normally used, powered by both Agamotto and the Philosopher's Stone, making it a 360 protection. Nothing could harm Chandra until he gets out of the barrier. At least for the next half hour, which was the time limit. And only Chandra and Harry himself could enter or exit the barrier freely. Plus you can't use this particular shield to protect yourself. It is always to be used to protect others, or it won't work. Knowing Chandra will be ready in 30 minutes at most, Harry turned to the other masters and said, "We have 30 minutes to find the zealots and kill them all. I can sense that Dormammu has possessed one of his zealots. Which means that the more time we take, the stronger he gets." Julian and Jamal nodded gravely. Harry moved to give another order when suddenly the dark magic fluctuated. Turning around quickly, Harry cast the original Shield of Seraphim, to cover all 3 of them from the direction of the forest. About 10 black daggers and swords struck the shield and stayed there, not piercing, but not falling down either and pushing Harry a feet back. Harry widened his eyes at the strength behind the throws, while Julian and Jamal got on guard, again. "You were better than the last of your sorcerers I fought. The thief. Tell me your name, sorcerer." The one who threw the daggers at Harry stated as he leisurely walked out of the forest. Harry looked at the man, and his companions. Everyone had the mark of Dormammu on their heads, displaying their servitude. But the worst part was that Harry knew all 7 of their faces. They had stayed with him at Kamar Taj, ate the same food and learned the same knowledge. "You betrayed Kamar Taj. What do you have to say for yourself?" Harry asked the zealots, ignoring, but not turning his back to the leader. Who was most likely Dormammu himself? But Harry had to stall for time. One of the zealots, Thomas, if Harry remembered correctly, came forward and said, "You betrayed us first. We know how you stayed immortal. And now that we use the same method, we are the traitors. You are the traitor here, Sorcerer Supreme. You tapped into the dark dimension and stole from Lord Dormammu first. We just followed in your footsteps." Harry looked at Thomas incredulous. Jamal and Julian looked at Harry in horror, while Dormammu narrowed his eyes at Harry for a second, then turned to Thomas like he was an idiot. Harry spoke up, "How the fuck did you come to that conclusion, you idiot? I was immortal way before I even met a sorcerer. Merlin taught me when I was 800 fucking years old." Julian and Jamal lost their horror, but became determined and turned back to the zealots, while Thomas started sputtering, now knowing that his assumption was wrong. Dormammu, surprisingly, nodded sagely at that and said, "You shouldn't jump to conclusions, young. Whatever your name is. Speaking of, is the thief Merlin dead? I can't sense him anymore, and he was connected to the dark dimension." Harry nodded and said, "Merlin died a few centuries ago. Now, Dormammu, get off my planet and leave this dimension, or I will find a way to kill you." Dormammu waited a second, and laughed. He laughed loudly, with his gravely voice sounding even more evil when laughing. He stopped laughing, pointed towards Harry, and said, "Sorcerer, I will enjoy killing you and taking this realm for myself." Like that was a signal for attack. The zealots moved as one. 6 of them immediately conjured weapons out of the glass-like energy from the dark dimension, and moved to attack, Dormammu staying behind. Harry walked forward, bringing out Godric. He leaned away from a swipe from above and quick as a panther, and nicked the zealot with his sword. The basilisk and Noondu poison in Godric immediately started working in poisoning the zealot, killing him within 5 seconds. Everyone stopped fighting, the zealots in fear, and the masters in curiosity. Dormammu frowned at the ease with which Harry killed one of his servants. The masters were fighting one zealot each, both on almost equal ground. Jamal was fighting with a man bigger than him by half a foot, but was holding his own better than the zealot expected. While Julian was staying far and attacking with mandalas, Harry once again started walking towards Dormammu, trusting his subordinates to take care of themselves and then guard Chandra. The rest of the zealots that weren't fighting masters immediately ran towards Harry, hoping to overwhelm him. Harry bent under the sword of one, punched him away, sending him 20 feet into the air, pierced the chest of another with his sword. The last zealot was shaking now and started to run away, but a black sword pierced his head, killing him on the spot. Harry looked towards the one he had NCHED away to find another black sword already pierced into his head. Pathetic. These are the sorcerers you trained. So weak. Nothing compared to the sorcerers of my time. Agamotto trained everyone to be as strong as that thief Merlin. And now these weaklings. I find myself disappointed. Dormammu spat out, after killing his own subordinates. Harry growled at him and ran forward with his full speed to attack. He jumped into the air and swiped to cut Dormammu's neck, but Dormammu leaned back, almost lazily, and backhanded Harry in the face, sending him back towards where he was. He's this strong in a vessel. How strong is he without it then? Harry thought to himself. Now having a measure of Dormammu's speed and strength, Harry banished his sword at Dormammu at speeds faster than sound, and followed it with shouting. Crimson bands of Sidorak. Dormammu caught the sword, Godric in his hands, in order to cut the pursuing crimson bands of Sidorak. But before he could cut the bands with it, the sword cut into his hand itself, and then disappeared, banished once more to the Mokeskin pouch. It was a spell Harry had cast when he re-forged the sword of Gryffindor into Godric. No one can hold the sword if they don't have Harry's permission, and they get cut and poisoned if they do it, depending on intent. The ones who just want to look at it, hold it, or steal it, will simply get cut to warn them of it. While the ones who want to attack Harry with it will get poisoned too. So Dormammu's current vessel was as of that moment, poisoned. But Harry didn't know how effective basilisk poison was to the Dread Lord. Dormammu jumped over the crimson bands, dodging them, and then spent the next few seconds doing acrobatics to do the same. Enough! Dormammu shouted, and sent out a wave of magic out of himself, destroying the bands and sending Harry backwards through a tree. Harry skidded to a stop, after destroying 2 trees with his body, and looked towards where Dormammu just was. Not seeing him, Harry ran forwards, but had to dodge at the first step as a sword, conjured entirely using dark energy from the dark dimension, was sent at him way faster than Harry sent his sword. Rai moved to the right to dodge the sword and found himself defending against physical attacks. Dormammu, in his vessel, was attacking Harry with harsh punches and kicks, faster than Harry could follow. Harry blocked, moved, and tried to fight back, but Dormammu was simply too strong. In desperation, Harry apparated out of there and landed in between Julian, who had just killed his opponent and was running to help Jamal. And Jamal himself. Chandra's shield was a little ways away from where Harry was. And he still had 10 minutes to stall. Harry prepared his spells before Dormammu even made his appearance out of the forest and sent a wave of fires of Faltane at him, followed by shouting, "I call down the Rains of Ragador." The Rains of Ragador was an invocation spell that brings down magical beams of energy on the enemy, in the form of rain. Harry kept the 2 spells going for 2 minutes straight, which strained him a little, and then stopped. He panted a little and turned towards his subordinates, who were standing near Chandra's shield, with their backs towards the shield. Harry's magical senses alerted him of an attack happening, so he shouted, "Shields!" All 3 of the Source RERs brought out their strongest shields, with Jamal shielding behind Julian and adding his own shield to it. Harry slammed his hands on the ground and whispered, "I summon forth the shielding powers of the Vishanti," and brought his hands back up, palms facing Dormammu. All 3 shields, including the shield of Seraphim, were bombarded with the strange dark energy weapons, swords, daggers, sometimes even plain rocks. Harry's shield defended against it for a while, the same for the shield of Seraphim. But Julian's shield broke after half a minute of bombarding, with the weapons piercing Julian deeply in the shoulder, chest and legs. Julian fell down, dead, but not before he used his portal to send Jamal behind the shield of Seraphim, saving his life. Julian, Harry whispered harshly, sad at the death of his subordinate. Gritting his teeth, Harry put more of his energy into the shield. Harry's shield stayed put for 5 complete minutes, with the shield of Seraphim deflecting every attack. So Dormammu stopped attacking the shield and started concentrating on Harry. Harry's shield stayed strong for 10 more seconds before breaking. Harry immediately apparated out of the place to go behind the shield of Seraphim. But unfortunately, Harry got pierced in the left shoulder by one of the swords, before he could get out. Sorcery is weak against him. He broke through the shield of Vishanti in 6 minutes, but if he had concentrated on me first, it would have been gone within 2. Let's try magic then. The real magic, Harry whispered to himself. Dormammu stopped attacking Harry and Cam out of the crater that was formed thanks to Harry's spells. The vessel was damaged, with cuts and breaks in bones. One hand was cut off, but it was replaced by a conjured prosthetic. Harry removed the sword in his shoulder, brought Julian's body behind the shield of Seraphim and said, Jamal, don't interfere. Once Chandra's ritual is finished, the shield will break. Once that happens, don't let Chandra get interrupted. Use portals to divert the attacks. Don't shield. Jamal nodded, knowing that shields were weak against Dormammu's attacks. Harry left the protection of the shield, and walked slowly. His shoulder was still hurting. Not even a little bit healed, so Harry put his right hand on his left shoulder and started whispering healing spells, Episki, Vulnera Sananter, Sana Humero, Episki, Consuo. As Harry walked, his shoulder wound started slowly knitting back together. His bones will still be sore, but an hour in the healing pit will fix that. Dormammu looked towards his healing shoulder and said, you are stronger than Merlin, I'll give you that. But you are still far too inexperienced in the mystic arts to truly defeat me. Harry smirked internally, not showing anything on his face, and simply summoned Angar to his right hand. Angar, when it was remade, was engraved with runes to make it possible for it to conduct his magic into it. So Harry sent pure magic in his axe, making it glow an eerie shade of green, with a little bit of black and silver in it. He knew that green and black was the color of his own magic, thanks to his connection with death, while the silver was the inherent magic of the axe. It was most likely the remnant of the magic of the witch on the moon. With his left hand, Harry sent a silent bombarda at Dormammu, who widened his eyes and put his prosthetic hand in front of his face, to shield it. The hand got blown to pieces as soon as the spell struck, making Dormammu fly away from his position. Should have started with that, Harry mumbled, and ran after Dormammu, not giving him time to reconjure his hand. So now both the fighters were a little handicapped. Harry without his left shoulder, and Dormammu without his right hand. Harry swung his axe at Dormammu's head, who leaned back and tried to punch his face. But Harry was waiting for it and cast Reducto in his chest, at point-blank range, blowing a hole through it. Not waiting for Dormammu to heal himself, Harry used his axe and cut into his hip, from one side through to the other. AAAAARRGGGHHH. Dormammu shouted out loud, in rage. He started absorbing more dark energy from the dark dimension, and healed his body, or more appropriately, Dormammu conjured a new vessel for himself using the original body as a template. His vessel now dead, Dormammu was free to use his more than adequate energy to use, which was being held back by the vessel's inherent magic. So he started sending a beam of his dark energy at Harry, overwhelming him, and sending him falling on the ground. Harry tried to defend against the dark energy using his magic, but it still proved inadequate. He held the energy beam back with his strongest magical spell, Custodier a Malo, which literally means, protect from evil. But still, Dormammu's energy beam broke through, sending Harry back and crashing him against the shield of Seraphim. Dormammu leisurely walked towards where Harry was, on the ground. He smirked at Harry and said, you made me come in person, instead of just a vessel. You will be remembered, Sorcerer Supreme, Harry Potter. Your name shall be written as the only to succeed in bringing me to your Earth, not by summoning me, but by killing my vessel and overwhelming my power. But now, your death is inevitable. You can't kill me, not even with that different magic of yours. You lost and now the Earth dimension is mine." Harry softly chuckled to himself, stopping Dormammu's mad cackling, and then evolved into laughing loudly. Dormammu, getting angry, lifted him by the neck and punched his stomach with his full power and then threw him towards the crater where Dormammu once was, making Harry gasp and spit a little bit of blood. Harry stopped breathing, and held onto his stomach for a few seconds, but then resumed his chuckling. Now, even Jamal, who was still hiding behind the shield, was concerned for his superior. "What is so damn funny, sorcerer?" Dormammu, who had walked towards Harry, asked, sneering at him. Behind Dormammu the shield was starting to lose color, turning a little translucent. Harry, who had kept an eye on Chandra this whole time, said, "You dumb dread lord. I was never going to kill you. I was the distraction." Dormammu got surprised by that, and turned towards the shield, which was now transparent. Inside the shield was Chandra, with the Book of Saraswati in his left hand, and the right hand pointed towards Dormammu. In front of him was a small diya and an incense stick, a small cauldron, kept on a burning flame, and the vapors from the cauldron was being collected in Chandra's hands. As soon as the shield completely went down, the vapors stopped coming from the cauldron and Chandra started chanting, reading from the book. Hollow square, 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 hollow square. Hollow square, 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 hollow square. Hollow square, hollow square, hollow square, hollow square, hollow square, hollow square. Pronunciation. My Devi Saraswati ki Shakti ka. Avan Kartahu. Taki va dar shaden ko uske dire mi bay sake. Ja Rukshas. Translation from Hindi. As I can't speak and couldn't find Sanskrit, I call upon the power of the goddess Saraswati to banish the dread devil to his realm. Get lost, monster. Chandra, whose eyes were now glowing white with power, thanks to the Book of Saraswati, was now holding both of his hands together. His hands were glowing white with all the collected energy from his ritual, which he banished towards Dormammu. Dormammu, seeing the ritual going, had tried to interrupt him, sending his sword at Chandra, hoping to end the ritual by killing him. But Jamal intervened and spun his right hand, keeping his left in front of him. He created a small portal right in the path of the sword, opening it behind Dormammu. The sword pierced Dormammu's shoulder from behind. The energy collected for the banishment ritual was launched at Dormammu, who still tried to dodge the beam. But Harry was behind Dormammu, so he called his axe and sent a beam of magic through it and into Dormammu's back, sending him right into the white beam. Aarrgghhhh. Dormammu shouted, this time in pain, and his current body got immediately vaporized. The particles from his body floated back towards the breach. Knowing that Dormammu will just send another of his smaller bodies, Harry got up, clapped his hands together and chanted, Ton Ton Chom Fon Kra, and pointed both palms towards the breach, which slowly started closing at Harry's urging. Within 10 seconds, the breach between the Earth dimension and the Dark dimension closes completely, not leaving any trace behind. Even all the weapons that Dormammu had conjured during the fight, as well as the bodies of the zealots, were destroyed and banished to the Dark dimension. Good work, Chandra. Right on time. Harry praised Chandra and patted his shoulder. Harry turned towards the London Sanctum, which had been half destroyed, and said, Bugger. Harry brought out 3 vials of pepper-up potion and gave 2 to Chandra and Jamal. He drank his own potion, which the 2 masters followed. They grimaced in the taste and Chandra asked, What the fuck was that, Master Harry? Harry smirked at him and said, "Pepper up potion, Master Chandra. It will just give you back your strength. Temporarily. You will be tired as fuck later on." The two nodded at that. Harry stood up, properly this time, and waved his hand towards the sanctum, muttering, "Reparo Domum." It was the spell Dumbledore had used to fix the house Slughorn was hiding in, right before Harry's 6th year at Hogwarts. The buildings started fixing themselves, with the ground slowly returning to its pristine condition. The sorcerers looked wide-eyed at the display and took a few steps back, in fear. Everyone knew that no one can manipulate matter in the real dimension, unless they are connected to the dark dimension. "How did you do that? Is what Thomas said true?" Jamal asked, not attacking, but ready to defend himself and Chandra. Knowing he can't back out of answering, Harry said, "No, that was false." They were still tense, so Harry sat down on the ground and let the spell do its work. Continuing his explanation, he said, "I was born in a race of humans. Different from you, but similar. We could manipulate an energy that we called magic, to do anything we could imagine, depending on the individual's power, of course. An accident happened when I was 20, which made me immortal. Some 800 years later, I first met the sorcerers of Kamar Taj, met Merlin, and he offered to teach me sorcery. I had nothing else to do, as the rest of my people were all dead, so I accepted. So you see, I am immortal, but I did not sell my soul to Dormammu to do so. If I had done that, I wouldn't have fought him." As for this, Harry waved his hands towards the now repaired London sanctum. "This is one of the spells that I can know using my magic." The masters, Chandra and Jamal, had grown intrigued, and sometime during the explanation, both had sat down in front of Harry, now relaxed, but thinking, a whole race of humans who can do what Master Harry can, that's scary. Chandra thought to himself, and then asked, "How do you not confuse yourself between the two magics?" Harry snorted at that and said, "I bloody well did, at first. I used to think every magic is the same magic, but when I became a master of the mystic arts, I learned that the two were different. So I started calling my own energy as magic, and the ones you use, as sorcery or mystic energy. It makes my headaches less painful. Then there's the Asgardians. Their kind are born with their own brand of magic, which some of them, mostly women, learn to do. Their magic is called cedar." After that, the two calmed down. They rested 2 more minutes and then left, taking Julian's body and the now useless philosopher's stone with them, and erasing any indication of their presence or their fight. They did get 3 more students from the few villagers who had watched the fight. But Harry knew that this will start a witch hunt if the news got out, so Harry erased their memories of the full fight, starting from the breach. He did it after sending his new students to Kamar Taj, obviously. He was going to explain the situation to them once they were masters. After that, once he confirmed that everything else was all right in the other 2 sanctums, as well as at Kamar Taj, Harry went back to Avalon and bathed in the healing pit. "Ah, that's better," Harry whispered to himself once he was inside the pit, and he started healing. This fight taught him that no matter how strong he was, there's always someone stronger than him, both magically and physically. Sorry for the bad banishing ritual. I tried to think something else up, but nothing else came to mind. Nor Mal-Hindu rituals, and yes, there are some, are not that language friendly. Ton Ton Chom Fon Craw. This spell is used to close portals from other dimensions, but I used it here to close breaches anyway. The Latin spell's meanings you can find by going on Google Translate and selecting Latin to English translation. And so, yes, Philosopher's Stone becomes useless after 1 strong ward. I did it so that it doesn't become overused. Harry can make more stones anyway. But he can't just use it as a ward stone for everything. I think I made a mistake by using the stones as ward stones anyway, but doesn't matter now. Review please. A date with the lady. Black. Everything was black, as far as Harry could see. He could see at most his hands, and nothing more. It sort of reminded him of the time he had jumped into the Vale. He was most probably dead, but didn't know for how long. The last thing he remembered was getting shot in the face by an advanced energy weapon by Johann Schmidt, the leader of Hydra. And now, Harry was somewhere, laying on what he hoped was the ground, as it was very dry. Stupid Harry, should have kept your full strength on. But no, you had to at least look like you aren't a juiced up superhuman. Right, bloody idiot, that's what I am. Harry grumbled, annoyed at himself. He had worn a ring that day, as he had done for the last 5 years that he was in MI5, that held back most of his strength. He could have just held back, but sometimes, in war, instincts take over, and so Harry had designed that ring. The Icipho, or Vibranium, as it was being called for about a century, ring that he wore, was inscribed with restriction rune schemes. One part held back his physical strength to 1/10 of his original strength. So where before he could lift 40 tons easily, now he could only lift 4 tons. Granted, it's still 3.5 tons more than any human could do, excluding the newest super soldier, and Schmidt, but still, he felt weak when he did that. The other part locked away his instinctive magic. He could still use magic wearing the ring, but it has to be intentional. He couldn't just use shields to stop a bullet or something. He was bulletproof, so he didn't need magic to defend himself. And now he was vaporized. The ring was first designed by him in the 17th century, when he was in the Maratha Empire. He was pretending to be just a regular foot soldier, so he still had to hold back his strength by a lot. So Harry designed that ring once he had successfully infiltrated the training camp. He had a language problem, but he went by with pretending to be mute, but not deaf. He could understand Marathi just the same as any other language he spoke, thanks to legilimency, but his accent would have ruined everything. He just didn't have enough time to fix his accent for that time. It was a split-second decision. Harry continued speaking to himself, and now, thanks to a dumb fucking decision, I'm dead, for who knows how long. And I don't even know where the fuck I am. Harry shouted the last part. You need only ask, Harry Potter. A beautiful, but gravely voice said from behind where Harry was laying. Harry jumped into the air, as the power behind the voice demanded his full attention, and he hadn't even sensed anything coming. Just by listening that one sentence, Harry knew that he was in some deep shit, or he was finally dead. Harry turned towards the voice and almost dropped his jaw. There was a lady standing there, with an ethereal glow to her. She had pale skin, and by pale, Harry meant whiter than Voldemort pale. She wore a black dress, with a transparent veil covering her face. The dress was like the one Princess Leia wore and created so much controversy. With one strip at her front, and another at her back, showing her legs and not leaving much to imagination. Harry shook his head and looked up, towards her face. Her face was beautiful in a goth sort of way. Yes, Harry remembered goth from his previous universe. Here were blue rectangular markings on her face, 2 below each eye, and 1 from her lips down to her chin. Harry kept on looking at her, as her eerie beauty fascinated him. He had seen Amora, Sif, and even Lady Frigga a few times. But this lady just took the cake. She did not have boobs bigger than everyone like Amora did, or her muscles weren't better than most men, like Sif. Thankfully, she was not motherly, like Frigga. But she was just beautiful. Harry couldn't describe why he felt that way even if he tried. Why, thank you, Mr. Potter. Now if you're done ogling me, the lady said, amusedly. Not at all uncomfortable with how Harry had just undressed her in his mind. Harry shook his head, blushed and rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment and said, sorry. I don't know why I was just like that. She nodded her head and said, understandable, Mr. Potter. You haven't encountered a cosmic entity like myself before. Cosmic entity? Who are you? Harry asked her, now curious, and forgetting his earlier questions. She waved her hands and conjured 2 recliners. She sat in the one behind her, motioning Harry to do the same, and said, cosmic entities are exactly what they sound like. We are the most powerful beings in the entire multiverse. No one, other than other cosmic entities, can even fight us and hope to stay alive, let alone defeat us. As for who I am, you know me, Harry Potter. After all, we have met before, at the King's Cross station. King's Cross, Harry whispered to himself, frowning in thought. And then he widened his eyes and snapped his neck towards her so fast, that it gave him whiplash. And hesitantly asked, Death. The lady, now known as Death, smiled at him widely and said, pleased to finally properly meet you. The last time we met, as you might remember, I was wearing this face. Her body rippled, and was replaced by a face from Harry's past, one who ignited contradicting feelings from Harry. Dumbledore. Both love and hate. Love for being a sort of mentor to him. And hate because he could have been nicer about it. Everyone manipulates everyone. Dumbledore could have simply helped him too, and not just dump him in an abusive household for 10 years. But Harry knew why he did it. He got it. Doesn't mean he had to like it, but he understood it. So it was you who asked me to go back. Death wanted me to stay alive and be her master. Harry asked incredulously. Lady Death returned to her previous, very attractive, form, and snorted, completely unlike a lady. She waved a dismissing hand, and said, your world's wizards jumbled the title. You weren't ever supposed to be my master. And yes, I wanted you alive. Harry frowned at that, a little relieved that he didn't have that dumb title which was just literally thrown at his face by Dumbledore. He still asked, a little bit bitter that he didn't know this before, why did Bast call me Master of Death, then? Shouldn't a goddess know? For that matter, none of the souls I called back mentioned it. They even called me Master. Why's that? Death grinned at him and said, Bast is a minor goddess with dominion over one religion of one continent. You were way above her pay grade. She shouldn't have even threatened you, but you were still weak, then, so she could get away with it. As for the souls, you are their master. Master of the dead. You have the authority to order them around. But that doesn't mean you can order me, though, capiche? He gulped a little and nodded at her. He then asked, so, what am I then? Why am I immortal? Why do I always go back to life? Lady Death hummed to herself, thinking over the answer, and said, you're my helper. Servant, heir, slave, herald. Yes, let's go with that, you're my herald. The herald of death. Harry, who had gotten pale at servant, heir and slave, was suddenly relieved, but he didn't know what the duties of a herald were. So he asked, what are heralds supposed to do, Lady Death? Well, I'll tell you. You see, wait. Lady Death spoke up, before frowning and asked, do you know about celestials? Harry scratched his chin with his hand and said, no, I don't think so, but I can guess what they are from their names. Death nodded and said, yes, celestials are the strongest race of beings in the multiverse, after the cosmic entities. Or you can say this multiverse. Harry interrupted her by asking, what do you mean by this multiverse? I thought there was only one multiverse. Death snorted, then shook her head and whispered, of course, you did. She then continued a little louder, the smallest unit, for us, is the universe. It's just one pocket of space-time. A group of universes, which are somehow connected to each other, are called multiverses. Your universe, and the one you are currently living in, are from the same multiverse. I am the death for this multiverse. I hold dominion over this whole multiverse, with the other cosmics, and can travel freely between these universes. But, we can't travel to other multiverses even if we know about them. Similarly, celestials can travel all over the universe, but they can't travel to other universes. Now, above the multiverses comes the omniverse. This is the highest anyone can go. The omniverse is the collection of all multiverses, both known and unknown. There are infinite universes and infinite multiverses. But there is only one omniverse. It is ruled by two beings whose names you're not allowed to know. Harry nodded his head at that answer, understanding a little, and said, sorry, please continue. Death nodded at him and continued, now, there are at most 5 celestials alive at this day, out of which, only 2 roam freely. One is named Ego, the living planet. Yes, he is a planet with his brain at its core. The other one is called Galactus. Galactus is a celestial who has a herald. Always. His herald's job is to scout planets for him to eat. The richer in life, the better. What? Harry, who was quiet for the whole time, shouted, interrupting her. He growled, now enraged, I will not scout planets for you to eat and kill everyone. I would rather die. Good. Death said, nodding in agreement. Harry lost his rage and eloquently stated, Death spoke up, ignoring Harry for now, have you ever tasted a whole planet full of living people? Because I have, and I hate the taste of planets, and the souls might possibly be tasty, but I'm Death. I don't eat souls, I send them on their way. Now, Shut up and listen, human. Scared of the power emitted by the entity in front of him, Harry snapped back into his place and crossed his hands. Death looked at him in annoyance and said, "Good. Now don't talk, unless I ask you a question. Your questions can wait. So, you will be my herald, meaning I will send you only to kill those beings who are not meant to be eternal, but they have somehow gained immortality. No planets. Just immortal beings. Speaking of, I have a job for you right after our talk is over and you're back on Earth. Remind me to give it to you, K." Harry nodded rapidly, still scared, but a little relieved by the job he had. Killing immortals was something he knew. Case in point. Voldemort. So, Death spoke up again. And said, "Any questions?" Harry started with a question he wanted to ask for a long time. Why haven't we met before? I've died 5 times? 6. Why haven't we met during those times? Death made an sound and answered, "Thought you might ask a different question first." So why now? Simply speaking, you weren't strong enough. Want a long answer? Your answer begins with the Tesseract. This is the first death you've had thanks to a cosmic power, and yes, the Infinity Stones count as cosmic powers. If I had met you in this form when you died for the second time, you would have become a vegetable. Alive, but not living. Thanks to the ritual you do during the lunar eclipses every year, the heart-shaped herb, the exposure to 2 Infinity Stones, and lastly, getting killed by the energy of an Infinity Stone, these all factors lead you to meet me. If any 2 of the conditions were not met, you'd have to have waited another death or 2 to meet me. Harry nodded in acceptance, satisfied with the answer, but then he noticed something and asked, "Second time?" "That was my second time dying." "Oh yes, absolutely. You didn't think you can just not die when hit by a killing curse, did you?" Death asked Harry, who blushed, because that was exactly what he, and the rest of the wizarding world thought. Well, you're wrong. You died that day, for, maybe just a microsecond or something. As I expected to be, I was notified of your death as soon as Riddle's curse hit your 15-month-old body. But you were to be my herald, so I sent you back. There's a paradox somewhere there. If you try to find it. Death said, and then chuckled at the last part. You knew I was going to be your herald, so you sent me back to life, which in turn made me your herald after 16 years. Harry chuckled wryly at that. His whole life he was ruled by a prophecy, and now his being alive was thanks to a small prophecy too. Why me? Why was I supposed to be the herald? Harry asked after 2 minutes of silence. Death smirked at him, clapped her hands a few times and giggled. She exclaimed, "Oh, I've been waiting for that one question for 3,000 years." Harry actually dropped his jaw this time. Seeing the scary Lady Death giggling like a schoolgirl, and at the amount of years she had waited for one question. What could be an explanation for that? Harry thought to himself. Death did not disappoint, and explained, "This is a long story, so sit back and relax. This story starts 4,000 years ago, in this universe, when the Asgardian king, Odin, had a daughter, named Hela. You might remember her name from the Norse mythology of your universe, her being Loki's daughter in the myths. The seers messed that part up, by the way. Right multiverse, but wrong universe. So anyways, Hela was born. And 1,200 years later, she was known throughout the universe as the goddess of death. Why? Because she was a necromancer. Honestly, she shows off her necromancy to her father and gets a realm named after her. And becomes known as the goddess of death. Do you know how insulting it is to me? She created Sturdier and Fury and gets the title of goddess of death. The uppity bitch. Harry, who had calmly listened to the story until now, almost laughed when he saw Death scowling at the perceived insult. But Harry could understand. Titles are not to be taken lightly, after all. Death continued speaking. After cursing Hela for a while, she said, "Now, when she was 1,200 or something years old, Odin grew scared of her. She stopped taking his orders, she did everything else Odin himself did when he was young. They both fought with the same ferocity, killed with the same idiotic grin on their faces. Both Odin and Hela were monsters on the battlefield. So, Odin decided to punish Hela. Because she didn't listen to him anymore. But did it do it himself? No. Odin sent his best warriors after her, the Valkyrie. Now those ladies were something. The grace, The Pegasus they rode on. Amazing. You're drooling. Harry dryly pointed out at her fangirl behavior. Death cleared her throat and wiped her lips. She continued speaking, like she wasn't just drooling at the thought of warrior women, and said, "Anyways, no use thinking about those gorgeous warriors now. Hela." Death spat, "Slaughtered all of them. Odin had sent them to their deaths. Only one of them is alive as of now. And she is getting drunk off her ass on planet Sakaar, with no thoughts of going back to Asgard. You should do something about that too. I'll put it on the list." Hela slaughtered the Valkyrie, and so now Odin himself comes. He defeats her and banishes her to Helheim. He then fortifies the protection spells with his life, so as long as he's alive, Hela doesn't escape Helheim. Death paused at that and smirked, and now, here's the interesting part of the story. There's something more interesting in this story than a fangirling death. Harry whispered to himself in shock. Death ignored him and spoke. Hela was not content with sitting in Helheim, trapped for eternity. As long as Odin was alive. She knew that Odin would stay alive for at least 2,500 more years. So she started trying to escape using her magic as well as her necromantic powers. Using Norse runes, which Odin himself taught her, and her necromancy, Hela made a device that would theoretically help her escape from Helheim. It was an arc-like portal, which led to somewhere away from Helheim. Sounds familiar, don't it? Death smirked at the horrified face that Harry had made. The Veil of Death, Harry mumbled. Death kept smirking and said, "Correct, she found a way out of Helheim. But not as she had hoped. Oh no, Odin expected this. So he had even incorporated a spell stopping her body from going away from Helheim, again, until he dies. So, Hela activated the Veil of Death, and went through it. Correction, her soul went through it, which led her to Midgard. You're Midgard, but not directly to Midgard, no. Her soul passed through here, through my realm first. It doesn't have a name, but every soul passes through it." Death paused her story and smiled at Harry, waiting for him to realize something. So Harry narrowed his eyes at her for a minute, and finally gave up and asked, "All right, I'll bite. What did you do to her?" Death laughed and said, "I blocked her memories, all of them. And shed her soul into an unborn wizardling baby." Harry widened his eyes at that, understanding the implications. He sighed loudly, ran his hand down his face, and asked, "She's my great-grandmother or something, isn't she? That's why I was selected for being a herald." Death stopped laughing, but still kept a smile on her face and said, "Not quiet. She's your direct ancestor, yes. But it's also true, for every wizard and witch from your generation. Except maybe the Muggleborn. Although, your friend Hermione was also descended from her." Harry blinked once at that revelation and asked, "So, Hermione wasn't an actual Muggleborn? After all?" Death snorted at him and said, "Don't be stupid. Even a child of 2 squibs is technically a Muggleborn. She was descended from Hela, yes, but that doesn't mean she was secretly a half-blood or something. Now shall I continue?" Harry nodded, reluctantly, not knowing what more revelations Death was going to drop on him. Death continued, "So, on October 31st, 1189 AD, in your universe, Hela Hufflepuff was born. And yes, she was one of the multiple descendants of Helga Hufflepuff. I wanted to birth her as a first-generation witch, in a farmer's house. But I couldn't change the standards she was supposed to live by, no matter the universe. Now, Hela had completely forgotten everything about Asgard, or even this universe, so she lived a happy life. Went to Hogwarts, got sorted in Slytherin, ironic really. And then, she got married at the tender age of 19 to your ancestor." "Let me guess," Harry interjected dryly, "Ignotus Peverell." Death looked at him for a long moment, in annoyance for interrupting her, as well as in disbelief, as if he was stupid. She finally asked, "Have you even seen your family tree? Ignotus was born in 1214 AD. No, you dumbass. Hela married Antioch I, Ignotus's father. Now zip it, and listen. Hela married Antioch I Peverell at spring equinox, 1207. It wasn't a love marriage, but an arranged one, although she was a happy wife. Now, remember when I said I blocked off her memories? Yeah, when I did that, I couldn't block out her instincts. So I also couldn't block out her fascination as well as talent in necromancy. Now, Midgard at that time was really liberal with the dark arts, so necromancy was only frowned upon, but not condemned. So she had a lot more material to study from as compared to on Asgard. Hela had become known as a necromancer, and now she taught the same skills to her children. Antioch too, Cadmus, and Ignotus, your ancestors. She lived a full happy life of 47 years, and then died. Now, when she died, her soul had to go back to her original body, so I let it go through the veil of death in your universe and sent her back in her original body, this time keeping my hands off her brain. So when she woke up, back on Helheim, she knew everything that had happened. She didn't want to become immortal again, so she destroyed the veil she had made, and stopped trying to escape Helheim. Back on your Midgard, before Hela's death, she had sent her 3 kids on an errand out of the village, on her birthday, no less. Where they met me, and the story you know happened. Cross a river, impress death 3 gifts wise younger brother yada yada yada. So there, this is why you are my herald. Death finished, satisfied by her explanation. Harry thought it over, but still had one doubt about it. So he asked, Lady Death, I get that you wanted someone from the line of Odin as your herald to snub him, even if it's only magically, and no one knows it. I get that you needed an affinity for death in your herald. But there had to be thousands of people who were descended from one of the Peverell brothers. But why me? Why me, specifically? Death smiled kindly at him and said, oh, I forgot about that part. Every other descendant of Hela Peverell were only descended from at most 2 of the brothers. Your Voldemort was descended only from Cadmus. Albus and Aberforth Dumbledore were from Ignotus and Antioch. And so on, most of it was thanks to the intermarrying of wizards. But none of them were descended from all 3 of the Peverell brothers. That was one of the conditions for being my herald. Just like one had to have all 3 Deathly Hallows to master death, he also had to have the blood of the 3 original owners of them. Plus, the way you got them was the best clue, even if you didn't know the actual story. Harry frowned at her, and asked, what do you mean? How am I descended from all 3 brothers? I only knew about Ignotus. Death nodded at the question and answered, your father was descended from both Ignotus, as well as Antioch. Antioch's only daughter had married into the Gryffindor line, and her great-grandchildren married out into different families, one of which, Potter. As you might know, Ignotus's granddaughter, Iolanthe Peverell, married Hardwin Potter, the first Potter and the son of Linfred the Potterer of Stinchcombe. You see, most of the wizarding world that you first knew was descended fro both Ignotus and Antioch. Only a few were descended from only one of them, thanks to all that interbreeding. But Cadmus, no, Cadmus's descendants were down to only 2 lines. The Gounts, who never married their women out of the house for fear of sharing their parseltongue. All the other lines had died out, or got married into the Gounts. And there was Squib line, which produced only squibs for centuries. That was, until Lily Evans was born, a magical descendant of Cadmus Peverell, the first to be born after Tom Riddle. So yes, when your mother and father had you, you became the first person to be born out of all 3 lines. Which automatically made you the prime candidate for the Herald of Death. Then there's also the date I gave them the gifts in the first place. Death finished her explanation calmly, either ignoring, or not seeing Harry's nervous state. Harry gulped, nervously, and asked, what was the date? Death said, the 31st of October 1225. That was when I met the 3 brothers. I'll explain the significance. Ignotus was 11 when I met him, and he was 11 when I gave him the cloak of invisibility. His older brother, Cadmus, was 16, and had just lost his fiancée to an illness, when I gave him the resurrection stone. And the oldest brother was 17, almost 18, when I gave him the wand of Elder, or as you know it, the Elder Wand, the Death Stick. Harry had his eyes closed, in frustration. He spoke, unnecessarily, I was 11 when I got the cloak, 16 for the stone, and 2 months away from 18 when I got the wand. Was this all supposed to happen? Was there even an ounce of free will on my part? Harry was shedding tears at the end. The first 18 years of his life were spent dancing to the tune of Dumbledore and Voldemort. Dumbledore meant well, but he still played with Harry's life, and Harry had said the same to his face. Well, to his portrait and his ghost, but you understand. And now, He finds out that everything was predetermined. Everything he did was so he could come to this universe and become its herald of death. When he tried so hard to make his life his own, he was supposed to dance to someone else's tune now. Only now, there's no choice in the matter. He could have said, "Fuck you," to Dumbledore or the wizarding world any time and gone off to an orgy or something. But here, Death herself was asking, which meant ordering you to do stuff for her. Harry kept crying, in helplessness at the situation. It sounded like something only his life could turn into. In between tears, Harry felt someone hug him to their chest, their soft chest. Harry kept crying, ignoring Death's hug. Death rubbed her hands on Harry's back and whispered to him, "Hush." Yes, it was supposed to happen that way, but of course there was a choice, child. Your life was full of obstacles, and you could have quit your duty anytime you wanted. But, as soon as you touched the third hallow, and rejected the stone and the wand, you passed the test. How should I say it? Your life was the preparation tests for the main exam that was your decision to give up the hallows. If you had accepted the hallows right away, if you'd been selfish, I would have let you live your full life of 127 years and you would have died an old man in Hogwarts. But you didn't, and I'm happy for it. Harry cried for another minute, and then wiped his eyes. He looked towards Death and said, "The first 17 years of my life I'd been manipulated by Dumbledore, to give up my life at the right moment, to die. Then I found out that I can't bloody stay dead. So I started living my life as I wanted it. I became a scholar, ignoring the offers for jobs as an unspeakable or an Auror. I taught at Hogwarts, doing what I loved, at the place that I loved, with the people that I loved. I couldn't marry anyone, but that was okay, because I already had a son that I loved, Teddy, but then he died, along with everyone else. So I gave up on trying to find love for myself. And now, you're telling me that all I had to do was keep the wand and stone for myself and I would have lived a happy normal life." Death frowned at him and smacked him in the head. She said, "Listen, normal is overrated, and they died, so does everyone. So will you, someday. You will live longer than anyone save the Cosmics, but you will die. If you just wanted long-living partners, you could have tried it with Amora. Or Sith. Both are exactly what you wanted. Or even Loki, if you were into that." Harry snorted at her, sniffed his nose, and said, "The only time I met Loki, he was a 400-year-old teenager. I'm not going there. Sif is not exactly my type, and she's in love with Loki's brother. As for Amora, I do like her, but she's not that serious. Shagging a few times was okay, for her, and for me. But a commitment is not something she does." Death shook her head at her Herald's nativity and said, "Well, that's your problem. Any other questions?" Harry nodded at her, resigned, and asked, "What are my duties, as the Herald of Death?" Death put a finger on her chin, thinking. She said, "I don't really care what you do in your life. It's your life. But I will give you jobs to do once the time for it comes. Speaking of, there are 2 jobs that I have for you once you are back home." Harry cleaned himself up with a spell, knowing he has no choice, but taking it in stride, he asked, "What's the jobs?" "The first is take that spaceship you have stored, or use those portals of yours, and go to planet Vormir. You'll have to search for the planet yourself. In all the time you've been in my realm, your murderer, Johann Schmidt, has wound up on planet Vormir, immortal, and is guarding the Soul Stone. He was forced to do it though, so when someone takes the stone away, he will be free to return home. I want you to kill him, and keep the Soul Stone somewhere safe, but keep it hidden from everything. There are beings that can sense those stones." Death started with 2 fingers held up, and pushed 1 finger down as she said it. "The second job is forging a weapon for your job as a herald. You have Uru, you will know what to do when you get home. But beware, don't use that weapon on every upstart you encounter. You will use the Godkiller only on gods, and only those I ask you to use it on. Those that have somehow cheated me, only those are supposed to be killed using the Godkiller." Death pulled the second finger down, signifying the end of tasks. Harry nodded at her and said, "Sounds easy enough. What's the catch?" Death looked at him and patiently explained, "Infinity Stones are dangerous. Earth already has 2 of them. If people, dangerous people, find out that a third is on Earth, they will attack it to find the stones at any cost. Are they my attack thinking Earth is getting too uppity? You have to keep the soul stone hidden from everything and everyone. Don't even tell Amora, or everything will go down in drain. You can figure something out to block out its energy pattern. Harry nodded at her, knowing she was speaking the truth. He was about to ask another question when there was a bright flash of light from his right side. He turned to look at it and saw that it was a portal, similar to what he remembered Veil of Death being. Death got up and dusted her dress. She said, "Well, your body has finished rebuilding itself. Be thankful that I brought it to your island. Or your animals would have attacked humans to find you. Plus, you'd have been reborn in Poland, in front of people. Which would not have been good for your health." Death paused a bit and said, "We will meet again, my Herald. You can think of any more questions you have yet to ask. Until then, goodbye." "Hey, wait a minute," Harry began, but something pushed him into the portal as Death waved her hand. The last thing he heard was Death's melodious voice, giggling at Harry's face. "I hope you forgive me, Harry Potter. Your presence is important for the existence of our multiverse. Or I wouldn't have brought you here. One multiverse has already lost its balance, thanks to one child in a tantrum. I will not let Thanos destroy this multiverse too. I have a vested interest in this one." Death mumbled to herself. When Harry next opened his eyes, he jumped back from the long, pointy fangs in front of his face. "God damn it, Felix, don't scare me like that," Harry shouted at Felix, who was laughing at Harry. Felix was about as tall as a hippogriff, so his fangs were quite big. Felix growled at Harry after laughing at him for a minute, and Harry got the message. "Where were you all this time? How long has it been since I died?" Harry asked himself. To check, Harry waved his hand and whispered, "Temp et diem." A hologram of some letters and numbers appeared above Harry's hand, which said, October 31, 1953, 1707. 1953, I've been dead 10 years. Harry shouted out, looking at Felix, who just looked at him dryly as if asking, "Why do you think I was worried, you dumbass?" "Damn, I didn't think I would lose this much time. I expected maybe a month or two. Not a decade." "Damn," Harry exclaimed. He then noticed something. He had an idea of a weapon, a godkiller weapon. He quickly wrote it all down, before he could forget it. Death had sent him the knowledge he would need to make the godkiller. But for that to work, he'll have to kill Schmidt and bring the Soul Stone first. As for how he'll go, he has the Kree spaceship that he had rebuilt, with vibranium. He had just made it using normal metals and fibers first. But his Saint out-of-planet flight showed him that the space debris can harm it. So he rebuilt it using vibranium. Then there's the space stone pellets he has. Creating portals to the planets will be easy enough, once he knows where exactly it is. But if it doesn't work, only then he'll use the spaceship. But for now, he hasn't eaten in 10 years. He needs food. It had been 4 days since Harry had been brought back to life, and Harry had spent those days gathering the news and checking over everyone he knew. He had found out a lot of things. Like Steve Rogers' stint as an actor, dancer, promoter for the war bonds. His re-entry in the SSR when Sergeant Bucky Barnes was captured, along with his regiment. How Peggy, Stark and Rogers flew in, with Rogers single-handedly rescuing the 107th Regiment of the Allied forces. Or what was left of it after Zola's and Red Skull's human experiments. He found out about the Howling Commandos and their guerrilla fights against Hydra, Bucky's death, and Zola's capture. And he read how Steve Rogers sacrificed himself by sinking the plane into the Arctic Ocean, along with a lot of missiles. Harry had two thoughts. The first thought was, how brave he was, to sacrifice his life for the sake of the innocents. He was only 27 years old. He would have been in Gryffindor if he was in Hogwarts. The next thought, after he had fully processed the situation, was, dumbass didn't even try to do anything else. He could have jumped out the plane, he would have survived, there already was autopilot in the plane. He definitely would have been in Gryffindor. My 15-year-old self. And Steve Rogers would have been best friends or rivals in their hard-headedness. That was in 1945. The same time the Second World War had stopped back in his universe, although instead of Hydra, there was Grindelwald. The worst Dark Lord after 18th century. The only Dark Lord to force whole countries to ally against each other. Comparatively, Voldemort's second reign of terror was across the magical government of one nation. He was bad, but he was not worse than Grindelwald. Anywho, the other things Harry found out were the formation of S.H.I.E.L.D. under the leadership of Peggy Carter, Colonel Phillips, and Howard Stark. And Howard Stark's discovery of the Tesseract in the Arctic Ocean, when he was looking for Steve Rogers' body. Knowing that a super soldier was not needed, at least for now, Harry had stolen back the serum from UK. He did not trust the new queen to make a good decision. She was headstrong, but when he had met her, she looked to be on the way to become a bitch, frankly speaking. Back to Avalon, Harry was sitting in his study, folding his hands and looking at the empty space in front of him, with Felix curling beside the hearth. Bor Burrison, Harry mumbled to himself, concentrating on calling his soul back to the living. Herald of Death, Bor greeted, as soon as he was in the room with Harry. Nice to meet you, King Bor. Harry greeted politely. This was a former king of Asgard, a ghost. But the ghost of a king nonetheless. It doesn't hurt to be polite. What can I do for you, my lord? Bor asked Harry, bowing his head a little, not enough to show deference, but enough to show respect. I did not expect this when I decided to call back the former king of Asgard. I expected curses, power plays, and demands to be sent back or sent to Asgard. Harry thought to himself. Out loud, he asked. No offense, King Bor, but why are you respecting me? Your son was ready to go to war with me when we met, and your grandson wanted to teach me to respect my betters. Bor chuckled a bit ruefully and said, unlike my son, Odin, I know to give respect when respect is due. My father taught me better than I taught him. So I apologize for his insults, as they are a direct result of my upbringing. Harry blinked, then blinked again. He nodded at Bor and said, apology accepted, King Bor. He was brash, yes, but I already expected it of him. I'd simply assumed that he was arrogant as he was a king. And the stories and songs in his name must have done his ego no favor. Bor nodded and said, thank you for understanding. Now, what can I do for you? Harry straightened up, getting serious, and asked, what do you know about planet Vormir? Bor stiffened, not wanting to answer, but the resurrection stone forcing him to do the same. He said, Vormir is a planet in the Andromeda Galaxy, outside the Xandarian region of space. As far as I know, it was destroyed 7,000 years ago. No one from my time knew the exact location, but if you go to Xandar, you might find out where it is. It has long been suspected that one of the Infinity Stones is on that planet. Being the only unknown stone at that point, Soul Stone is the most likely suspect. No one had went near the planet for 6,000 years. The last one to do so was an Eternal who later disappeared. That is all. Finishing his speech, Bor softly glared at me. Harry slumped back. It was not much, but it was still something. He didn't know where Xandar was, but he could bet that his ship did. Other than the data on the storage devices, Harry had replaced everything on the ship, and now it was unrecognizable as Kree in origin. He will just have to invent a new planet, if anyone asks. He looked at Bor and said, sorry about that, I did not know it will force you to do this. Every other time I called anyone, they just willingly told me in fear of retribution. Bor nodded stiffly, but said nothing. So Harry continued, well, thank you for this information, King Bor. Do you know who might know for sure where Vormir is? Alive or dead? Bor looked thoughtful about it and shook his head. He said, no, I don't know who might know where Vormir is. Your best bet is the Collector, who could be found on Nowhere. Nowhere? Harry asked, baffled. Nowhere. Bor corrected him, and explained, Nowhere is a place. It used to be the head of a Titanic celestial, but after his death, the head was used by the Tannelier Tivan. Or the Collector as a mining site. He mined brain matter, bones, bone marrow, and skin tissue of the celestial, as it is really expensive on the black market. To go there though, you will need coordinates. Which I can't give you as Nowhere changes coordinates periodically. Go to Xandar, my lord, and you will find all the knowledge you seek, or the path to it. The former king stated in a flat voice. Harry rubbed his forehead at that, and said, thank you, King Bor. Just one thing before you go. Look in my eyes please. Saying that, Harry dived in using legilimency and copied every alien language Bohr knew. Which were a lot. Then he copied his knowledge about the planets and different species, and then dismissed his spirit. Not counting all speak, which was an amazing ability in itself. Harry copied the languages of over 100 races in space. The most prominent being Kree and Xandarian. Although planet Xandar was the capital of an empire, called the Nova Empire, with a collection of different languages. Just like how Earth was. Except, Xandar was ruled by one person, the Nova Prime. He already knew the Kree language thanks to the trespassers he'd killed a few centuries back. There were bound to be differences from the languages now, and some 6,000 years ago. Harry also found something interesting in Bohr's mind. The location of another Infinity Stone, and the T.Me when it will be next available for the steal. The Reality Stone, aka the Ether, was sealed, buried deep inside Svartalheim, or the Dark World. However, just knowing the location wasn't enough. It was going to stay hidden from everyone until the next convergence, which was in about 60 years. After going over everything he got from Bohr's head, Harry went over to the Kree Harry's space ship, for final preparations. He was going to leave for space the next day, with Xandar as his first location. He was going to work there as a mercenary, for a few years, to earn enough of this credit that they used. Or he could sell his gold, silver and vibranium too. He could just transmute any of his crap into any precious metal he liked. It wasn't like it was especially expensive for him. Going to the space ship, Harry first ran a check over the systems, making sure everything was running okay. The tracking chips were removed, so there was no way the Kree were going to come after him. Then He went and gathered everything he was going to need. He might just portal back if something was necessary. You might be wondering, why doesn't he just portal to Xandar? Harry can't. No one can. They actually know where you want to portal. And you can't portal somewhere you haven't been before, or don't know how it actually looks like. You can go somewhere if you have seen the image on a TV. But you can't do the same for a drawing. Mystic arts were complicated. Once his stuff was gathered, Harry went towards where Felix was sleeping. He asked, "Felix, would you like to come to space tomorrow? We'll be gone for a few years. But you can come back home anytime you like." Felix opened one eye and glared at Harry. Harry could simply feel the annoyance radiate off of him. He simply huffed and went back to sleep. Harry shook his head and said, yes, I won't leave you. But, you'll have to wear a collar once we're there. Oh, don't glare at me, Felix. It's so no one takes you with them thinking you're a stray. Grr. Felix growled at Harry. Harry sighed at Felix. Look, where we're going, we don't know what people eat. They could be cat eaters for all we know. Yes, I won't let them eat you. I will simply put some spells on your collar to make sure no one takes you away from me. If they try, you can eat them. He explained patiently, making eyes wide, feigning fear. He was scaring Felix with cat eaters. But it was a valid fear. They could be human eaters too, which meant that an immortal with a healing factor was pure gold to them. Harry shivered and used occlumency to banish those thoughts to the dust bin. He looked to Felix, who had agreed to wear the collar, and said, "Okay then, I'll make the collar once I'm back from visiting Minerva. I have to tell her I'm back from the dead, and then say goodbye to her." Shaking his head at his life, Harry created a portal to Minerva's office room, where she was sitting with 2 teas in front of her on the table. Harry simply sat down, knowing she was using the time stone as a warning signal. He sniffed the tea, and found it to his liking, so he took a sip. "So, how was being dead for a decade, Master?" "Minerva, or as she's known now, the Ancient One," asked Harry. Harry snorted and said, "It was a decade for you. For me it was literally half an hour." He finished drinking the tea and looked into Minerva's eyes, showing disappointment and pride. Pride because his student had chosen to damn her soul for the protection of the dimension, the same as Merlin did. But disappointment because she did it without consulting Harry. Granted, as the Sorcerer Supreme, it was her choice to do whatever necessary to protect the planet, as well as the universe. And again, it was her soul to damn. But still, Harry would have preferred he be there when she performed the ritual, in case anything went wrong. Instead, he simply found out when he visited half a century after his departure from Kamar Taj, to find dark energy in Minerva's forehead and her still being 50 years old. Stop thinking, Master. It might hurt your old brain. Minerva snarked, hiding a smirk behind the teacup. Harry shook his head at her and said, yeah. Make fun of the old guy. When I was your age, I used to respect my elders. Minerva smiled at him and innocently asked, was this before or after you threatened the whole Asgardian army? Before. Way before. Harry simply answered, without an ounce of shame. He had literally mind-raped the ghost of a 6,000-year-old king of Asgard. 6,000 when he died, by the way, so technically about 8,000-year-old ghost. Minerva smiled at him, and the two stayed in companionable silence for a few minutes, just enjoying the other's company. Finally Harry said, I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm going to be traveling into space. Visiting other planets. I wished to let you know, even if you probably know it already. I knew you were leaving, but not where. Minerva speaks up. Harry nodded at her and warned, don't take what you see as definite. Time is not stable. The timeline is, but what you see is not. Always from this timeline. Hope you understand. Minerva nodded and smiled at Harry, and said, Haven't you always taken what I see through the eye with a grain of salt? But thanks for the warning, Master. Bring me a souvenir. Harry shook his head and simply pulled her into a hug, knowing she's feeling lonely too. She sacrificed a lot for Kamar Taj. Her beliefs, for one, then her friendship, and sometimes, it felt like she'd sacrificed feelings too. Harry did not mind that no one cried, as he expected it. All the tears had already dried up, when it came to the two of them being alone. They had been meeting once or twice a century, just for the sake of meeting, so this was a routine for them. Comforting each other with hugs was what they did. Gently pulling himself away from the hug, Harry kissed Minerva on her head and said, take care of yourself, Minerva. Don't hesitate to use the mirror if you need me. And for fuck's sake, retire already. Minerva smiled at Harry and said, I will retire when my successor gets here, Master. Maybe then I'll live out my days on your Avalon. Harry nodded and said, and you will have a room prepared for the stay. You know what, if you need a break from everything for a while, just go and stay there for a few days. The wards will welcome you, even if I'm not there to bring you in. Minerva nods and says, I will accept the invitation and take a few days off. But not yet. After a few months, Harry nodded at her and said, better be off then. Have to leave early tomorrow. Goodbye, Minerva. Goodbye, Master. Have a happy journey. Minerva wished and waved as Harry went through the portal to Avalon. Avalon. His home for more than 1,200 years now, and he had brought only 5 people there. Ever. The first to visit was Amora. Harry had invited her to Avalon on their third meeting, right after Harry had finally managed to perfect Asgardian illusion magic. That was 10 years after he had gotten the book on it. Asgardian magic was tough. Amora had been baffled when he spoke about an island, hidden from everything and everyone, even Heimdall, and also her own scrying magics. So she had kept on visiting Avalon, sometimes just to spend time with all the magical creatures there. The Thestrals particularly adored her, as she gave them steak every time she visited. Seeing all the magical animals kept safe brought joy to her, the same as it did Harry. The next one that was permitted to enter Avalon was Lady Sif of Asgard. Harry had met Lady Sif when she had followed an Asgardian criminal, Lorelei, to Midgard. He had helped defeat Lorelei, and offered a room in his house for resting before she had to go. She declined, but accepted the offer to visit some other time. And she did visit a few times. He even sparred with her, knowing she had strength enough to fight him. It was not a particularly tough win, but Harry had not let it bring her down. And told her that he was some centuries older than her. The next to visit were Frigga and Loki. Frigga and Loki had come to Midgard to meet with the Nordic villagers, as they used to worship the Asgardians. Thor was there too, but he was drunk off his ass when he was on Earth, so they kept him at an inn, along with the guards, and asked Harry to visit the island. Harry had gone there, as he usually does. Whenever an Asgardian enters Earth. Frigga had heard about the island from Amora, who had spent countless hours singing the praises of Avalon to the lords and ladies of the court of Asgard. Surprisingly, the unicorns had come, running out of the forests to meet with Frigga as soon as she'd come through the portal. Loki was allowed by the unicorns to pet them only, but not ride. Meanwhile, the hippogriffs showed off their majesty by flying in groups and landing in front of the Asgardians. The phoenixes and the dragons stayed away, as the Asgardians were one of the people that killed off the dragons, as a hunting sport. Then, a couple centuries after Harry retired from Kamar Taj, in the 16th century, Harry invited Minerva to the island for the first time, who got excited, and replied saying, "About damn time. Even the eye didn't show me anything on that island of yours." Minerva would visit every century, at least once, and spent an equal amount of time with every animal there. When Harry came back to Avalon, he simply went to sleep, too mentally tired to do anything. He was going to space. In a spaceship, through wormholes, or jump points, as they're called. When did my Li Fei go from wand waving to science fiction? Harry asked himself, not expecting an answer. Marie wow. Felix answered anyway. Harry sighed and conceded to his point. You're right, of course. Ever since I met Merlin, everything kept going on a downward spiral to bizarre since then. Marie wow. Hiss. Yup. Fuck Merlin. Good night, Felix, Harry whispered, and went to sleep, thinking, I'll make that collar tomorrow. The next morning, Harry woke up at 5, as usual, and did his daily morning routine. Workout and checking on his different farms first. The farms mostly operated by themselves, storing the crop in a stasis. But he still checked occasionally to see if the spells were still working. Then he checked his potions room to see if there was any ongoing potion he had forgotten about. Not finding any, Harry left to his forge, taking 2 small coins of Giblin silver, and a couple meters of Noondu hide stripped from the vault with him. The Noondu hide was going to be the actual collar for Felix, while the goblin silver would ensure that the spells he was going to incorporate into it, stayed incorporated in it. Harry first melted the silver and added a gram of vibranium dust in it and kept a stirrer to stir the mixture. While that was going on, Harry measured the collar length for Felix's neck and cut off enough of the Noondu hide. By then the mixture of metals had become an alloy of metals. So Harry laid the belt down on a tray, and slowly poured the alloy over it, chanting a prayer in the goblin tongue. This prayer, which does not have a written equivalent, imbued the leather with the properties of the alloy, and the metals with it. So once this process was over, the belt would have absorbed the metals into itself, turning vibration absorbent, as well as magic conductive, alloy, with its original property of magic resistance and some physical resistance. Harry completed the chanting, and after a silver glow, the belt had a silver sheen to it. Dunking it in water, to cool down, Harry made a buckle. Once again using vibranium, which took only a few seconds using transfiguration. He then removed the belt from the water and combined the leather with the buckle. That was the preparation part done. After that Harry simply cast the spells he wanted to affect Felix, over the collar, and then put it on Felix. The first spell was one that made it impossible to remove the belt for anyone not Harry. It was possible that Infinity Stones might be able to remove it, but no magical or physical force could touch the belt, other than Harry. The second spell protected Felix from minor physical attacks. The rest he can avoid easily enough, or his hide can handle it. Same for the energy-based attacks. The third spell was a modified Reducio, and Engorgio spell, worked into one. It worked on living things, for starters, and it does not have a limit. Harry simply adjusted the spell so Felix was the size of a normal house cat, unless some sort of danger is close by. Then Felix can change to whatever size he wishes, from as small as a rat, to as big as an elephant. He did not like the belt at all, but Felix was a cat, and hence, an ass, so Harry ignored it and forcefully put the collar on his neck, shrinking him to a house cat's size, which caused him to start snarling at Harry and trying to cut him. Oh, shut it, you're still cute, Harry told the cat, who immediately started snarling and puffed up his chest in indignation, as if saying, I'm not cute. I'm dangerous, fear me. Harry simply picked him up and put him on his shoulder, trusting his reinforced clothes to not tear. Collecting everything he might need, Harry went to his ship. The ship, which he named Hedwig, was 20 meters long, 7 meters wide and 4 meters tall, at its highest. The cockpit was at the front, with an open view of the outside world. The window also had display screens in the corners showing 360 view of the ship. Although Harry didn't have much weapons, he did have a few modified Kree energy cannons. Along with ballistic missiles, Harry had built most of this himself. As for the protection, vibranium was used in making of the ship, along with the shields already installed. So he didn't worry much about getting attacked. And even if something did happen, Harry could just use portals to get away. It had 4 rooms with 2 beds each, 3 bathrooms, and a kitchen. There was a living room, with a computer system and a television system from the 24th century Earth. And it included some of the movies and songs Harry had brought with him. Harry entered the ship and turned it on, storing everything in their proper places. Felix came with him to the cockpit, making Harry shake his head and simply put on a seatbelt on him. Luna, flight check, Harry ordered. Luna was the designated name for the AI in Harry's ship. He had to find some way to honor his friends. Luna, who was a small floating head near Harry's right hand, said, "Thrusters are stable. Life support, stable. Fuel levels are good. Running simulation, check. Let's turn this baby on then," Harry said in excitement. Immediately thrusters started firing up, the ship hovering in place for a few seconds. Harry pushed a button and mumbled to himself, activating the cloaking field. The whole ship turned invisible, making it impossible for anyone to see it. The only sign that something was there was the slight blowing of the grass due to the thrusters. Harry pushed the throttle and the ship started slowly moving forward and into the air. "Still stable," Luna said, checking over the specs. He had already done space flights before, but it was mainly in the solar system itself. He had gone to Pluto just because he could. But now, he was going to another galaxy. So he wanted everything to be perfect. It took a few minutes for Harry to get out of the Earth's atmosphere, after which Harry spoke up. "Luna, set course to Xandar." Course set. Universal Neural Teleportation Network mapped. ETA 47 minutes and 38 jump points. "Please secure yourself to the seat and sit back," Luna said. Harry laid back on his seat and relaxed, knowing the ride will be bumpy from the video log already on it. And he was right. The whole fly was one rollercoaster ride after the other. While magic could have helped a little in minimizing the nausea, Harry wanted to go through the full experience first, which he now regretted. "Boss, we are being hailed by the ship in front of us." Luna's voice brought Harry out of his nausea. He looked out of the window, and saw that there were 5 ships, all smaller than his, shaped like a star, pointing their weapons at him. Along with a ray that had somehow disabled his weapons. Harry pressed a button near the display, pumping the shields to full power. Then he accepted the hailing from the ones in front of him. "Unknown vehicle. This is Captain Romani Rail of the Nova Corps. You were in Xandarian airspace during times of war. Identify yourself." A voice sounded, once Harry had accepted the hail, in what Harry recognized as the Xandarian language. He could understand it, thanks to the all-speak. Harry turned the mic on and answered, "This is Harry Potter, captain of the ship Hedwig, from planet Earth. I came here to trade and perhaps offer my services." The other side stayed silent for half a minute, and then the same voice said, "Follow us, we will lead you to the registration office. Register yourself and follow all the rules they tell you to. If you commit any crime, you will be sent to prison kiln indefinitely." Harry nodded and answered, "Understood." Harry followed after them, and got excited about the journey he was going to take part in. This is going to be so awesome.